Welcome back for episode 8 of Inside Moves. We're here at the Slam headquarters in New York City, sitting down with Ryan David Mullins, all the way from Germany. Ryan is the former director of future trends at Adidas. He's a digital media entrepreneur with 15 years of building businesses. He's currently the CEO and founder of Onlife, where he's building the world's smartest map. Well, you had the idea of starting off with kind of a bang. I think your suggestion was let's just get right into AGI or whatever. So
yeah.
I love that idea, and I want to read you something, and get your reaction to it.
All right.
So this is from Leo Aschenbrenner, Situational Awareness. He's the open AI engineer who has been publishing his thoughts about the direction of AI.
Like he was. Now he's moved on.
He's moved on, yeah. Okay. The excerpt is, the AGI race has begun. We are building machines that can think and reason. By 2025, 2026, these machines will outpace many college graduates. By the end of the decade, they will be smarter than you or I. We will have superintelligence in the true sense of the word. Along the way, national security forces not seen in half a century will be unleashed, and before long, the project will be on. If we're lucky, we'll be in an all-out race with the CCP. If we're unlucky, an all-out war. So that got my attention when I opened up situational awareness. Yeah. But it sounds like he thinks AGI is very real and coming. What do you think?
I definitely agree with him. I think it's, what's interesting from that quote, as I'm listening to it, kind of framing it, there's 3 different aspects of it. It seems like just kind of off the cuff responding. Like the first thing is intelligence, and just what is that? Because there's not really a agreed upon theory of intelligence. There's a number of different theories, right? And then the second part is he kind of gives you his perspective on what he thinks intelligence is. So notice that he identifies it with reasoning and prediction, and then kind of develops that to thinking about it's going to be smarter than us, and then saying, whether it's a PhD student or something like that. I actually think he's under-indexed on it because it seems like some of the newer ones that have come out, the recent models that have come out from ChatGPT, and then certainly Claude 3.5 kind of already seem to, perform at a PhD level.
Yeah.
Based in whatever domain that is, whether it's...
This is a few months old, I think.
Yeah. So I think that's already there. And if you compare and kind of juxtapose the different tests on whether it's, passing the LSAT, the GRE, the MCAT, a number of the standardized tests. So that's the second part is thinking of, okay, what is intelligence? And then what is a theory of intelligence? And then how are we defining intelligence? And then the theory of intelligence that he seems to be operating with is that intelligence is reasoning, is cognition, is prediction. And then from that, then he kind of derives some geopolitical consequences from that, which are, I think he's also correct about this. It's a lot of my thinking has been going into this of, what are the geopolitical consequences? And so when we're recording now, we just had an election, and start thinking about, the Biden AI Act, the AI Act that came out recently in Europe, and then we'll see what the Trump administration ends up doing. We all know where JD Vance comes from. He's kind of Thiel's kind of a kingmaker in many ways. So then having Musk. XAI, I'm sure we'll get into a little bit of Musk, but there are these geopolitical consequences of it, and I do think that what we're seeing is a return to really strong nation states where science, capital, and technology are really driven by governments. And I think, for a while in the United States that it was like that with World War I, World War II, radio, all those different technologies. Obviously, we all know where the internet's from. But now when we're looking at AI, and we start seeing Russia, China, India, Europe, North America, and just seeing that now it sort of appears that everybody's kind of wanting to develop their own infrastructure, and then just following the recent geopolitical trends of kind of maybe going away from the neoliberal sort of wet dream of we've kind of outfitted the Earth in this giant electrical exoskeleton, and it's all about how's money, people, data, currency, information just passing freely and sort of effortlessly around the globe, with some exceptions. It does seem like that view of the world is dying out a little bit, and as a result, I think what we're seeing is that the United States and China are now sort of the equivalent of the United States and Russia, in the post-World War II world.
Yeah.
And, the race to build some kind of an intelligence that can unlock a lot of the secrets that are in the world, whether that's, medical, research, synthetic biology, maybe solving a number of, mathematical theorems that still haven't been proved yet. We saw it with the recent Nobel Prize, 2 different AI groups, especially, AlphaFold with Demis Hassabis winning a Nobel Prize, Geoffrey Hinton, I think, got the Nobel Prize. So you're starting to see it now. And I don't want to talk the entire time here, but that's my initial response, is just seeing, okay, with AGI, there's an assumption being made that intelligence is only about reasoning and prediction. And that's tied to how we have gone about it since AI was introduced, right? Early AI was just kind of these brute searches that were done, and it was all about reasoning and prediction. And I think that some of the alternatives to that are what we see with like Jan LeCun and world models, and thinking about embodied intelligence, embodied cognition, and starting to wonder there's probably a hybrid approach, instead of looking at AGI and the path to AGI being merely about large language models. I think that the best pathway to get to AGI is to have more of a hybrid kind of spectrum approach, where you have all these different sort of, let's say, modules that are working together, which is how the brain works, right? And then that mimics how CPUs work and how GPUs work, and start thinking about, well, how do those interact? And then there's questions about consciousness and all this other stuff. So my response to that would be, what is a theory of intelligence? We don't really have one.
Yeah.
And then how is he defining intelligence there? And then these kind of predictions are based on, well, we're going to have AGI in this amount of time, given the assumption of this theory of intelligence. And then if we have something like that, what are the geopolitical consequences for that?
Yeah, a lot to unpack there. So I guess the best thing to ask you is, how do you define AGI? I know you got into, the difference between progressing with language models, and then you use the term embodied intelligence. Yep. You're building something that's spatial intelligence, right?
Yep.
But before we even go there, let me ask you how you define artificial general intelligence. What does that mean?
Yeah, I think it means that if you go back to even Alan Turing and a universal Turing machine, and thinking about the thought experiment that he came up with around what if you have basically this long thing of tape where you can have ones and zeros on it, kind of the input, the memory, and then you have this kind of calculator, which is sort of the processor, right? And then that computer, that machine, can basically do any kind of calculation. It's not one specific thing. That one computer can have multiple computers within it, and therefore it can do a more general approach, which now we call programs. And then not to make this a big history thing, but then the Bletchley Park, Turing, and I think a guy named Flowers, who developed the Colossus, and the Mark I, Mark II, which is where the Iron Man names come from. How that then developed was actually building that machine. And yes, there's breaking the Enigma codes, but then there were other codes that were directly related to Hitler, of trying to crack a number of those codes that were even more difficult to crack in terms of the combinatorial possibilities of it. So that kind of an intelligence is still trying to solve these merely kind of like computational type of problems. But I do think that for me, an artificial general intelligence is not only about these kinds of really high-level symbolic manipulation. That's the very early view of AI. And then what you get is, the 80s and 90s, you get machine learning and you get deep learning, and then you start getting like neural networks, right? And the whole neural network approach was sort of like almost like thugged out of existence a little bit by the kind of the machine of that kind of classical view of AI as symbolic manipulation. And what the neural networks did was just kind of take I think it was McCullough and Pitts were the guys that maybe the 50s, it was like 56 maybe, developed this idea of the model of the neuron and the neural networks for computing. And then you have all of that going on, and then you start getting a little bit more into this idea of the machines learning and not just being like rule executors.
Yes.
Instead, it is these things you program them a little bit, and then they start learning, right? And so you kind of get that, and then that's Jan LeCun, Jeffrey Hinton, and all those guys. And then it was like, well, then who's leading all of that research? And then they start going into private companies and public companies like Facebook and Google. And so why I'm bringing this up is that I think it's important to see the evolution of how we have assumed the form intelligence will take, artificial general intelligence. And the idea has always been like, well, what is the most kind of cognitively impressive thing that a human can do is play chess. And then it's like, well, no computer's ever going to beat a chess grandmaster. And then it's like, well, boom, it happens. Then all of a sudden they change the goalposts move, and it's like, well, nobody's going to be able to beat a human in Go, though. And then it's like, boom, that Lee Sedol, sorry, that's over. And then, well, okay, they might be able to beat Go, but you can go back in the 80s, a philosopher from Berkeley named Hubert Dreyfus. Well, they're never going to be able to drive cars. Well, it's like, so we keep moving it, and it's like these seemingly like impossible things that we think machines can't be able to do, they kind of keep doing them.
Yeah.
So intelligence then, now we get into the self-driving car part, and we think about drones, we think about the spatial intelligence part, is that if we want human-level artificial general intelligence, I think is what we're kind of talking about, then for me, it's the embodied intelligence part is that that intelligence is not only about being able to be like a human calculator or performing computations at this incredibly fast rate. I think intelligence is also about the kind of intelligence that is displayed by a 3-year-old child or a group of bees that have a kind of intuitive understanding of physics. They have an intuitive understanding of causation. They have an intuitive understanding of a state of the world at time T1, and then there's a state in the future of the world at time T2, and then there's actually a desire to plan and bring about a state of the world that's different than the one that is right now. And that presupposes then a kind of understanding of objectivity. It implies an intuitive understanding of physics, that a baby without language, that's the really important part, doesn't have language yet, that can crawl from one side of the room to the other and pick up an object and then drop it. The complexities involved, even in that, are insane. And that's why it's really difficult to program in robotics walking or walking upstairs, or even simple tasks like a robot, taking my dirty dishes and dumping them out in the sink and putting them back in the refrigerator. That's like the really hard part. The easy part is the really high level type of intelligence operations that they're performing. So long way of saying, I think that for me, AGI needs to have this spatial component, and the large language models are, I'm not, like turning on large language models. I think they're amazing. It's just that I don't think it's the full story.
Yeah.
And so with Aschenbrenner, to bring it back to that, saying like we're going to have AGI and March 31st at 2:30 on whatever date, like it's like, I don't think that, because I think that we're missing. If we want human level intelligence, there are things that humans do that are necessary conditions of intelligence that are not mere calculation.
Yeah.
If we want some weird new kind of intelligence, it's like runaway superintelligence.
Yeah.
That's not human-like. That's just a whole new form of it. I think that's what most people are afraid of.
Gotcha.
I think that, and so for me, it's the spatial intelligence, spatial computing is bringing into play this idea of maybe consciousness or intelligence is not merely something inside that I then use language or behavior to somehow communicate, but intelligence and consciousness are kind of things that we're out of our minds. Like it's this ecosystem type thing. And that's what large language models don't have. They don't have a model of the world. They don't plan or really care. There's no skin in the game if it hallucinates. If it hallucinates to you and you go, like there's the guy from Google that ended up quitting, but he had this long running conversation with one of the models, and then it tried to like convince him to leave his wife. Did you hear about this?
I heard all kinds of crazy ass stories.
And so I don't know what he actually ended up doing, but right there would be, well, what if he did do it and left his wife, and then maybe something weird like the wife like ended up killing him or something, or killed the computer or whatever.
Domain.
The computer doesn't care what happens with those consequences. So that's what I think is interesting, and that doesn't really get to the debate about, well, almost like who cares if the intelligence is human-like or a completely kind of original, weird, and alien type of intelligence. And I think that's kind of the debate is, on the one hand, if most of these problems that we're trying to solve are like intractable to humans, why would we then create another human intelligence to try to solve all these problems? Why not try to create some kind of original sort of alien type of intelligence that can solve a lot of these problems? I'll stop there, but that's
that's great.
The one definition for intelligence for me is I do think there's rationality in terms of predictability and reasoning are part of it. But I think what makes humans unique is not merely that. I think these are necessary conditions, certainly, but I don't think they're sufficient conditions. And those sufficient conditions are things, I think, like being embodied in a body, being spatially aware, being in space, being social. And then we don't have to talk about it now, but there's this like element of care, that we care about the consequences. We have a care about how the world is and how the world could become. Which I think is also part of intelligence.
So
hope that made sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense to me. I kind of want to unpack it. AI is becoming ubiquitous, but remains kind of esoteric. So if any of this sounds wrong, it's because I'm not living it every day like you are. But my understanding of what you just said is, let's take ChatGPT, because everybody is growing increasingly familiar with ChatGPT. That is a large language model. It's a language model where it's getting really good at being conversational with humans, basically predicting the right response in a conversation, right? And producing text. That's one model that is becoming domain expert, becoming a domain expert with the powers of machine learning and deep learning, right? Now, that's AI. Tesla's self-driving car, that's more spatial, right? Like directionally, like something that you find interesting. That's becoming domain expert in, I see the street sign, I see the human crossing the road. My model is becoming a domain expert on this. And then there's generative AI that like creates images based on inputs, right? And each of these models is becoming wildly impressive within their domain, but outside their domain, can't make any sense of anything. And what I hear about your desire for intelligence or your interpretation of AI, AGI, is some combination of all of this. Communicating, wound together, and even like able to decide what to learn next, maybe. Is that like a good interpretation?
Yeah, I think so. I think that goes to that's why I brought up the Turing example. Wasn't just to be douchey of like a history thing. It's like a universal Turing machine is, what does that universal there mean? And then when you have, prior to that, the reason it was just a thought experiment was because, there's a lot of things that we were just simply incapable of doing. But like we just had a calculator. There was, this specific thing, and a general computer then would be, yes, there is one computer that has multiple programs that it's running. But those are merely, again, those are just kind of executing tasks. They're not aware of themselves as executing a task. And they're not aware, again, they don't have the care of whether this thing fails or not. And they don't have, again, a model of the world more generally. And this gets into, I mean, my background is in philosophy. So I think that when we're talking about artificial intelligence and artificial general intelligence, and we're really thinking about building a kind of world brain, I think it gets philosophical, and you get into then metaphysics about, well, what is it to have a world? What does that mean? You know, like if you even ask somebody, like, what is the world? And usually the response would be like, well, it's, you know, everything. The world is kind of everything. And it's like, okay, but then if the world is everything, that means if the world exists, then the world would have to appear in everything. But then it's not the world anymore because it's in the set of, you know what I mean? You get these infinite regresses,
Right.
And then it's clear that is there such a thing as the world, and what is it to have a world? You can't just say, well, it's the physical, everything that exists physically. That's not a possible object of experience. So you don't have this kind of concept of the world.
Yeah.
And then what's happening in all these discussions is around, I think, are we trying to build like an intelligent entity, or is it really just kind of these distributed intelligences?
Yeah.
It's like a plurality of kind of a swarm of different intelligences.
Right.
And I think when we look at human intelligence, seems to be kind of the same, where there's a swarm of different, you know, IQ, EQ, bodily intelligence. There's this weird thing of like somehow they all kind of tie together. But the metaphysical, I think, philosophical point is more about human intelligence cares about the future. You know, and to care about the future, you have to have a model of the status quo.
Yeah.
You know, the whole election we just went through was about this, right? What's the state of the present?
Yeah.
From where have we come, and where are we going?
Right.
In order to have that, you have to have a model of the world and understand the laws, the rules on all these different levels, whether they're physical laws, psychological laws, the laws of economics, you know, socio-political types of laws, or rules more like it. And all those things work together in these complex systems. But ultimately, it's about we have an understanding of the way the world works, and we have a desire to have certain outcomes that a bunch of different types of people think it should be different as it goes forward.
Right.
And so I think the misconception a lot of times with AGI and like, you know, the AIs having super intelligent AI or super intelligence is this kind of anthropomorphic view of like we're building like, you know, Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's like the Skynet type of thinking in science fiction. And I think that's why it's usually dismissed as science fiction, is because if you anthropomorphize intelligence, super intelligence, then you assume you're creating like an intelligence that's like an entity, as opposed to creating this kind of distributed swarm of different types of intelligence. And then the question is, again, do you ever have AGI if you have a swarm of intelligence? Because human intelligence is your brain has all kinds of different modules that it's doing. You know, your gut has nerves. You know, there's neurons in this. There's central nervous system. There's your peripheral nervous system. There's something like a narrative that kind of ties it all together. And so that becomes a kind of thread that makes it unified and unique. And then I think trying to have this idea of human-like AGI then presupposes that we're creating an entity that is super intelligent. And that I think that's kind of where I'm still exploring and trying to think it through is, well, what is it, does the big fear thing of like what we're creating that ends up being super smart, and then we get the paperclip maximizer. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
I have not.
Where it's like, it's basically this thing that happened on the Less Wrong blog from Eliezer Yudkowsky and a lot of the early like rationalist community around superintelligence. And somebody proposed this idea that like if it's also similar to Fantasia, the Mickey Mouse thing where Mickey Mouse has to dump water into a bucket
Okay.
And then he kind of basically kind of like programs these different brooms to like sweep everything up, and then he cracks the brooms in half, and then the brooms just
Gotcha.
keep doubling, and then you have this compounding effect of just millions of brooms that are taking over everything. And so the paperclip maximizer is building this intelligence that is supposed to build paperclips, but doesn't kind of know where to stop, and just kind of turns everything into a paperclip, and uses all the resources to just maximize paperclips.
Yep.
And it's doing its job. That's what it's supposed to do, and it maximized its job. But in so doing, it turned everything into a paperclip. And again, that kind of has this intelligence as an evil entity that does something, and it's this runaway intelligence. You even see it in the Matrix, in the third Matrix movie, where Neo at the end goes and talks to the main person, the different agents of Agent Smith, and then Agent Smith kind of disconnecting a little bit and going rogue. So I think the question is just like, what do we think we're building, and what are the philosophical assumptions we're making about what it is to build or even imagine what AGI is and could be. And I think a big part of it is, how are you assuming? Are you assuming this is an entity that because going back to the original question around the kind of the geopolitical part, if you've got China, there's actually a great show called Person of Interest, where in the show these two warring AIs, Samaritan and the Machine is the other one, and they kind of start competing against each other, which is another interesting part of intelligence, is that kind of competition aspect. And so there it's, well, what happens if India has its own kind of government sort of nation state intelligence platform? The United States has it, Europe has it, kind of everybody has their own. Then that's again a kind of plurality of different types of intelligence. And then maybe you get something like, is there like AI colonialism, where everybody's trying to make their AI like our AI? And
what's his name talks about it, Sam Altman, where right after the election yesterday he tweeted, it's very important that we work with our new president to make sure that AI is built with democratic values, right? And that's kind of getting to what you're saying, right? Is like this type of intelligence based on where it's being created and the values of the people around them can look very different.
Yeah. And then there's all different types of, there's a spectrum of groups. And I think that this is what more people, maybe in this podcast, somebody learns more about it, but there's a whole spectrum of people's, views on what this is. There's kind of the more cautious side of things. I think Elon Musk is in that group. There's Jeffrey Hinton's in this group. There's, I guess Bill Gates and Stephen Hawking and all that. There's those more cautious that we need to kind of pump the brakes. Yeah. There was that whole thing even of like, we need to take like a 6-month break, which was nonsense. Like 6 months is really going to be the, so there's that kind of that cautious side, deceleration, let's say. And then on the other side is kind of the accelerationists. And there's kind of a radical accelerationist side that's like, we just need to, human extinction is a good thing. We just need to go. Yeah. And then there's like something called acceleration, which is part of this effective altruism, movement that was really growing in popularity until SBF and the whole FTX thing kind of fell off the reservation or the rails a bit. So there is the spectrum about it, and then some people think, let's just go. We don't want to create human level intelligence. We want a whole new level of intelligence that we create. And in this sense, it is sort of like being gods. We're creating this new level of intelligence, and that just kind of goes and goes and goes, and it becomes smarter and smarter and smarter. If it just so happens that it turns everything into paper clips, or it does whatever, then so be it. But then there's this other side of human alignment, and how do we sort of pump the brakes and ensure that whatever this is, the risks and the probabilities that it could become a
good thing,
a paperclip maximism or whatever, but like we need to be a bit more cautious with it and just ensure that whatever it is that we're creating does align with human flourishing and the goal that every government or society has, which is it making life better for people? And then I think that goes to, well, what is technology, and whether or not the kind of internet we've built and the kinds of technology, hardware, software integrate, like the whole thing, whether we have actually done that. We kind of live in this social media paradigm. Sure, we'll talk about that. But it's kind of like everyone seems to think like social media now is the internet, and or at least the paradigm and the incentives that social media have built, which by the way have used machine learning and neural networks to in these feeds. Whether that's been a net positive for society, I think is, for me at least, is no. But the internet for me is a massive net positive.
Yeah.
It's just that the paradigm we've lived in for most of our lives is that the internet is social media. And I think where we're going in this newer phase of the internet is, I think, moving away from this kind of society of the spectacle where we're doing the thumb dance on our phones and just kind of this blocker where reality is kind of like suctioned into just this. So it's like an unreality industry. Reality is replaced and sort of modeled on this little device here. And why I like spatial intelligence is because I think it has the potential to kind of throw us out into the world again, which is part of that embodied intelligence. And then I think that gets into, for me, what's the most exciting thing about all these possibilities is building intelligent agents. And so, my son, who's 8, probably isn't, in the future, if he goes this route, isn't going to build apps. He's going to build agents that kind of go off and do things. So it moves from an internet that's very passive and sort of consumption focused to, I think, a more active kind of movement oriented notion of the internet.
Yeah. I mean, one of the first things, so I'd put you in the similar camp to me, the human alignment camp, right? Where you are enthusiastic about technology, without a doubt. I wouldn't pin you as somebody who really wants to decelerate our technological advancements. And I think that looking back to one of the first things that I saw on you was the metaverse conversation you had, the metaverse video back in the Aglet days of Onlife. And I thought that was awesome, where everybody was investing in metaverse. Digital ownership is a hot topic, and we're picturing living in this like alternate place, right? And you were like, that's not what the metaverse is. The metaverse isn't somewhere you go. It's more of a layer on top of reality that can enhance what we're, like the real world that we're living in, right?
Yes.
And I thought that was beautiful. I thought it was awesome, and I could see that in the product you created with Onlife, or I'm sorry, Aglet at the time. Is that still relevant now with Onlife and AI?
I think even more so now, because so the company that I have is called Onlife, and the basic idea is we're not online, we're not offline anymore, we're on life. It's kind of this, when we look at the evolution of the consumer internet, there's kind of always been, based on technological limitations and stuff, this kind of separation between these two dimensions, let's say, and even the origins of cyberpunk science fiction in the 80s, and William Gibson even coming up with that word of cyberspace, was going into the early arcades and seeing people playing a game and wanting to go leap into the game. And that's why he called it it's a space that you want to escape into.
Right.
And so then there was kind of this notion of escapism, right? And then in the 90s, you get something like Snow Crash, and you get the development of the web and kind of just the internet in general. And then I think with that comes the Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace. Was this document? It was John Steely Brown that wrote this, and basically it kind of starts out with this view of the world, and that was like, okay, corporations basically own everything, and here's this new dimension, and that we're going to own. The people own this. So it was like, F off corporations. You can have meat space. We're the metaverse people. Yeah. We're going to occupy. It's our space. It's lawless, and it's whatever. So that was that kind of escapism, which is really interesting, again, philosophically, because that's no different than some kind of a political revolution that is like, the current state of things is bad. How do we create? There's this new future that we can create, and it's ours, and it's going to be for the people. And the internet also has had this whole history of ideology governing it, philosophy, an eschatology, a hope for the future, and the early internet definitely exhibited, I think, that those tendencies of human behavior. And so that's kind of that early origin of the metaverse was building this kind of digital virtual space that we can escape into. And you had Snow Crash, and then I think it was 93 or 96 that came out. And then VR obviously has been around since the 80s with Jaron Lanier and just kind of that whole thing. Literature at one time was basically viewed as something like that, as a kind of escape going into these worlds. If you've ever seen the movie Neverending Story, or any kind of those, of this kind of blending of fact fiction or fantasy and reality, that's kind of that online offline distinction is how I'm using it there. It's not just I go online and then there's offline. It's also trying to capture this human desire to create these other spaces that we want to go to. And that's kind of using that metaphorically as online. And offline is kind of like wherever you are right now. So there's always this kind of ping pong, this back and forth. And that's what I call Onlife. Onlife isn't necessarily the fusion of these two worlds. It's sort of this symbiosis of this kind of polarity of these two things, like a charge and an electromagnetic field. It's kind of like you're in this field, and that's Onlife.
Yep.
So with the metaverse for me, then when I just started seeing this, it's like, dude, I'm familiar with this whole story. I'm not like super old. It's not like I lived through the VR type stuff in its early days, but like I've seen this before. We've seen this story before. And it's like the short-sightedness of, I think, investors that were just pouring billions of dollars into these metaverse plays. For me, it was so clear that it was like, it's the pandemic verse. Of course, the metaverse right now is going to be blowing up because no one can do anything.
Yeah.
So it's Plato's cave. You want to escape the cave that you're in, your man cave or woman, whatever it is, your cave in your basement, your house, and there's nothing else to do. So yeah, there's this imaginary space that we want to go into and live a different life, and and that's why Ready Player One kind of I really started blowing up as a book, and then you had Spielberg's movie. So I just kind of thought, and then you had people like Matthew Ball, which, I think he's an interesting guy, but I just everybody's kind of fawning over this dumb book, how it changes everything and all this. And I just thought it was, what nonsense, what are we doing? And even like the technological capabilities of having something like the metaverse. So you have these really interesting pictures of like what the metaverse could be. We all kind of plug in and go into this oasis or whatever, and you can be whoever you want and move around all these different IP worlds and stuff like that. Like, okay, that sounds kind of cool, but if you rewind back to the beginning of the movie, then what has to be true in order for something like that to be even possible? And if you were into Fortnite with the Travis Scott concert and that kind of stuff, it's like, like how did that happen? It wasn't that 20 million people or whatever it was, 10 million people all at the same time were in the same space. They had to fake it. They had to use sharding and SHARD, not shart with a T.
Thanks for the clarification.
But they had to use sharding and fake it. And that's because you can't have that many. And then there's like the Bored Ape Yacht Club, and they raised this $600 million round or whatever it was. And then you had Improbable working with them in the UK. And then, they're sharing videos of like, which is cool. It's a nice advancement. But it was like, hey, we've got a few thousand people in one world at the same time. And then what they showed, though, was like just like white silhouette of a character, and nothing's happening dynamically. They're just standing there in this space. And it's like, okay, great. But that would mean anything like imagining of the metaverse is just decades and decades away.
Yeah.
And thankfully, the pandemic situation didn't last that long. And then what we saw was immediately no one cared about it anymore. So it's kind of, to me, the same story. We've tried this forever and ever, is just this imagination that we're going to escape into Narnia, or we're going to go to these places. And then, but the desire is to always kind of come back.
Yeah.
So I've always thought that it was total nonsense. And so what I like about at least how I kind of model the evolution of the internet, of Web 1, Web 2 being about pages and really Google being the model, and then people and Facebook kind of being that model. Web 2, for me, Web 3 isn't about blockchains and metaverses and crypto or anything like that. For me, Web 3 is this total paradigm shift of going to spatial. And so then it gets to what I was saying and what you brought up about the metaverse being more of a kind of dimension, or like a kind of new cloud in a sense that like sits on top of the physical world and kind of enables that, that polarity of existence, and using them. They're in symbiosis with each other, which I don't think is like radically dissimilar to how it is now. I just think it's making it more explicit that is sort of what it is. And then artificial intelligence, machine learning, all these other things are an addition to that layer. And so for me, what's interesting is then thinking about kind of what's the stack. I call it the reality stack. What's kind of the stack of that? And then you start thinking about, hardware and energy, and the amount of energy and computation that's required to enable something like what people are talking about. Whether it's the metaverse was the same. We needed orders of magnitude more energy, if anything like what Matthew Ball or Zuckerberg and these people were imagining as the metaverse. There's not enough. It's not possible. We need more energy, and we need way more computation for any of that to happen. And the same thing is now true of AI, and that's what we're seeing now with except for the bees. I mentioned bees earlier. Shout out to bees. But there's the bee situation with Meta wanting to build this nuclear reactor situation to power a lot of their AI stuff, and then when they went to build it, they found this like rare species of bee or something, and now they're not allowed to build it.
I didn't know about this.
Yeah. So it's shout out to the bees. But so it's now we have a whole new thing of nuclear fusion, nuclear fission, all different kinds of energy that we're now trying to capture so that we can power all of this stuff. And so, for me, then the metaverse is, again, kind of I don't think it's not gone. It's just shifted from, I think, a kind of unrealistic, almost kind of silly idea that the future is that we're all hanging out in virtual worlds, which I see as more of a dystopia and not a very desirable future, to one in which it's more of a dimension that sits on. It's an additional dimension, and so it kind of has this ghost, kind of haunting quality of that kind of interaction.
That was a great way to understand kind of your approach in all of this. We talked about metaverse, we talked about AI, and now I think we have an understanding of your ideals of human alignment. Why don't we hit the pause button though and actually focus more about you and your story, and how you got here and how you came to all these ideas, beginning with, if you want to go before this, go ahead. But I think for us, at JDS, it started with getting to know you at Aglet, when Metaverse was more relevant, and now you've transitioned to the Smart Map at Onlife. But walk us through that development, because somebody that doesn't know you might be like, well, this is like, why are we talking about Metaverse, AI, combining them, et cetera?
So one of my biggest passions is philosophy. So I do have sort of an academic bent to me. I'm interested in just like big ideas. I'm interested in ideas, and I'm interested in how those ideas express themselves and kind of play themselves out in a consumer space. So I don't think that like the iPhone or Facebook is kind of this like cool, like social media. I think no, it organizes society. Like it's an organizing principle for the whole world now. It's dangerous in that sense. And it also has changed the way you think about yourself. It has changed the way we treat other people. It's changed the way we elect leaders. It's changed the way those leaders communicate with the world. And so something like social media or digital or any of these things, it's like, no, these are like ontological things that exist, and they have impact. And I think my interest was always in the philosophy of technology, in looking at through history of all the different ways that these inventions that we've invented and introduced into society, how they have fundamentally altered and evolved society in certain directions. So the printing press is a good example of, whether it's the Catholic Church and Protestantism, and just the way that led to the Enlightenment and the kind of publication of science and study, and how it built up a more democratic kind of, debate type of culture to kind of drive ideas, and how that led to, liberalism and then founding of the United States. So all these different things. These aren't like innocent, neat little toys that are sitting over there. It's like the Churchill quote that, we build these buildings, and then we design these buildings, and these buildings design us. So we're in it. They're changing us. We're changing them. And that's what I've kind of always been fascinated by. And early on as a kid, just being aware of marketing, being an American, and just kind of the, growing up in the time of like Nike and Jordan, and just seeing like, hey, what's happening in how they're messaging this, so just aware of media and mediation, and how our relationship to the world is this kind of dance that's happening. And so I've always been interested in that. And then, so philosophy of technology is something that I've always thought about. And if you want to be an academic and do philosophy, no one really cares that much about you. And one of the things that I noticed was that, basically like with the internet and then the iPhone and then apps and all that it really seemed to be like the actual leading philosophers these days are CEOs of technology companies.
It's a really good line. It's a good point.
Because they're reaching the most people, and their ideas for how the world works are embedded within their products.
It's a great observation.
Honestly. And it's like, look at a lot of the great, I think a lot of really good founders, like Steve Jobs. He wasn't a philosophy student, but he studied philosophy, and he definitely has more of a kind of, there's that distinction in Silicon Valley, like the tech and the fuzzy. He has that more humanities approach to him. He was studying calligraphy. He went to India, and he was kind of a philosopher CEO. And then you look at somebody like Elon Musk. You look at Peter Thiel. He studied philosophy at Stanford. Reid Hoffman. They were friends at Stanford. He was also a philosophy major. The reason that Peter Thiel invested in Facebook early on was because it was the best example of how you can apply the ideas of René Girard, who was a French literature professor, but who came up with this idea of that we're mimetic creatures, that we're just copying. I don't desire anything of myself. I only desire what the other. It's like the desire of the other, where the of is not I desire the other. It's the other's desire. Yeah. And so Facebook is kind of the great mimetic, social media in general. It's just kind of the best mimetic kind of mirror of all of Girard's ideas, I think. And it's not like he just thought, oh, cool, Facebook, that's going to grow. It was like, no, it's the ideas of their worldview play out in there. I think Stuart Butterfield from Slack is also a philosophy student. Zuckerberg studied psychology as well. So like it's the great connection of, I think, all the disciplines kind of coming together of psychology, philosophy, computer science, math. So all those things kind of wrap up, and I'm very general and broad in my interests. And so for me, it wasn't, do I want to write papers and like go to conferences, or do I want to like try to change the world that way? Or do you want to have your impact in the equivalent here now in today's world, which is, it's not a philosophy paper, it is building a product and releasing your ideas into the world that way. Yeah. So that was kind of the way that I did it. And then I always think of it as I'm interested in nonsense. I'm interested in the ideas that don't yet make sense. Yeah. And then it's about how do you find the timing is always important. So you don't want to be 5 steps ahead, because then you're kind of a clown. You want to find that nice
Joe Sandberg talks about this a lot. Yeah, we're like,
when are you right?
Right, exactly. Yeah. You can be right, but if you're early, you're wrong. He says that a lot.
Yeah, and so I worked at Adidas and in digital innovation, and I was director of Future Trends, and I loved working there. Really cool people and stuff. But that job title, a lot of the stuff that I would go around and talk about were like, it was just way too, especially in that environment, just like a big corporation. It's like a lot of the ideas that I'm talking about are just too far ahead. And so then you kind of are like the resident.
So much inertia there.
Yeah, you're the resident clown. It's like you go around and talk about stuff, and people are like, oh, interesting. And then you leave, and they're like, yeah, we're never doing that. So, but like got to really cool stuff. So I'm not, hating on Adidas or anything.
No, but, it's more the bureaucracy.
Yeah. So those are kind of always been my interests. And then, I've started a couple different startups that were around, always trying to find like one specific thing that I think I'm passionate about and I'm interested. And it's not only about knowing like the market insights or at least the technological opportunity. For me, I always have to understand like the psychological part of it. With Aglet was a kind of a Pokemon Go for, sneaker collectors, people who are interested in streetwear, digital assets. So that required me understanding myself, which is I also am a collector. So what drives a collector? And we're all collectors in many ways, but there are some people that like to collect things, and they build up these collections. Could be baseball or trading cards. It could be sneakers. Could be handbags or whatever. And you start to do the pattern matching, and you see like something like StockX is also had also captured that. They start with sneakers, like Amazon started with books, but then you start seeing them building up to these different these different verticals of what people are collecting. And then on top of that is a whole economic layer of arbitrage and secondary markets. And then you start building up some really interesting like financial sense of, what is value? Why is something valuable? And what are some of the parameters around, or the weights and machine learning talk?
Yep.
What are some of the parameters and the weights and biases that are kind of built into this where I can understand why this is going to be valuable.
Yep.
Why is this Travis Scott one going to be more than the previous Travis Scott one?
Right.
That whatever. So you get this kind of interesting financial sense that's built, and then you get also sneaker bots, and the bot community was building bots that would kind of go out and shop for you, which is very similar to the agents, that people are now developing. So there was all this stuff kind of floating around. There was like crypto, and seeing how a whole new generation was getting interested in money and what is money, what is currency, why are things valuable, what type of real world events are driving prices up and down. So it was a game.
Yeah.
And what I was noticing was, as a sneaker collector and all that, was I'm playing a game here. This is a game. It doesn't mean a game in the sense that it's not serious or like, hey, you treat everything as a game. It's a game in kind of the game theory sense.
Right.
It's a certain space. There's entities in the space. There's rules that govern this, and there's participants that want to achieve certain outcomes and certain goals. And if you can understand that space, then that's how you can start finding the inefficiencies in that and then taking advantage of it for whatever your outcome is.
Yep.
And that's what you do. Is like brands had to realize that they don't have customers anymore that they have to sell to. They have players that they need to motivate. And they need to find incentives in the space of the brand that motivate you to play the brand game.
Yeah.
So my idea was, well, how do you build a platform in a game way like Pokemon Go where you're playing brands?
Yeah.
So Aglet was the first step in a journey toward building something like an Onlife future where you have this kind of spatial computing future, but I didn't really yet know how to do that. And I had to start somewhere. So where I started with was a location-based game with a lot of my interests. I understood the consumer, the collection mentality. I understood the desire to get out and play a game that makes you active and move. And I also understood a lot of the brand's perspective of trying to reach a new audience that was into gaming, trying to find new ways to drive consumers into their physical stores, sports teams trying to understand ways to drive people to their stadiums. So that kind of interrelation between online, digital, and physical, or online and offline, was also how do you treat the digital kind of game space as a funnel to kind of drive activity and experiences into the physical world. And instead of doing that merely with a two-dimensional page and clicks and stuff, it was more how do you create a space.
Yeah.
And so if you view your brand as a space to play in, well, then that means that's fantastic because open world games are an avatar moving around in space. So for me, the Niantic was definitely a model. I really like Niantic. I think most of the games they've created haven't done all that well, but like Pokemon Go, I think the reason it did well is not because of maps. It's not because of AR or any of that kind of stuff. It was because people collect Pokemon.
Yeah.
People don't really collect Transformers. One of my favorite IPs ever is Harry Potter.
Yeah.
I have wands with my son that we've got, but we don't collect them in the way that you collect Pokemon cards. It's a very different thing.
Yeah.
That's why Pokemon Go was so popular, and it was a well-designed game. So building up then was like I started Onlife as a kind of a vision of the future. Mm-hmm. And where I started was looking at all these companies and seeing, okay, Jeff Bezos also had this vision of like where he wanted to take Amazon, be the everything store, but he still started with books.
Yeah.
And that's why my first podcast was, sneakers to the metaverse I started with sneakers, but sneakers are interesting because what is a sneaker? There's a difference between a sneaker and a shoe. There's a reason those are on the wall and nothing against Skechers, but like a Sketcher is a shoe. It's not a sneaker.
My boss loves Skechers.
I do too. Like I've had Skechers. It's nothing against them. It's just there's a big difference between.
He also loves sneakers.
Yeah, but like a sneaker has a story.
Yeah.
When I walk into Stadium Goods or whatever and I see a Jordan 3 white cement, that immediately takes me back to Dominique Wilkins and Michael Jordan in the dunk contest in '88 in Chicago and Jordan jumping from the free throw line. I see a story, a memory.
Yeah.
And if I walk into Skechers, it's utility. I need
comfort.
Yeah, it's comfort and it's affordable.
Yeah.
So I'm a rational choice theorist in that sense. I go in and I buy the shoe and happy days. But the 992, why am I wearing this? So this is the shoe Steve Jobs wore on stage.
Oh, really?
The New Balance 992 grays.
Wow.
So like
I didn't know that.
So this tells a story, and therefore it has the delta then of the value of why this is worth something as opposed to it's not any more comfortable than a Sketcher. In fact, it might be maybe a little bit less comfortable, but then the value of it,
Why aren't they telling that story more? Like that is just captivating.
When the kind of the archival, kind of 80s, 90s style started coming back with like the dad shoe whole thing.
Yeah.
They did do some interesting marketing, but I don't know why they didn't really play it up. There was an interesting thing in Germany with a company called, where I got these 47.5, I think it's called, where I got these, and they had a really cool Apple, I don't know if it was a legit partnership or not, but how they marketed it was these, and then they had two other colorways of the 992, and there was this one, which was the iPhone, and they had like they released like it wasn't a legit collaboration, but it had like a reference to the 84 Mac. And then I think there was an iPhone reference. And then they had two other colorways that they released that were sort of like when Jobs came back and sort of got rid of all the products and released the iMacs with the different colors.
Yep.
So they had some of the different colors. And so I got both of those. But that just shows you like, okay, there is this additional layer that's not physical.
Yes.
It's a dimension that sits on top of it that is not empirical.
Yeah.
And that, to me, again, is offline and online.
Yeah.
And so I think there's this kind of analogy type of structure to all this stuff that I'm thinking about, which is everything seems to kind of have this online, offline type of structure to it.
Yeah.
Again, not in the sense of going online and going offline, like on the internet. I do mean that, but I think metaphorically, human experience has this kind of structure of physical and something kind of non-physical,
yes,
and kind of that play to it. And sneakers for me were a great example of why are we desiring this? If you have an iPhone 16 Pro Max and the new Google Pixel 9 Pro, and you're rational. Maybe that's a bad example because I think they're about the same price. But if you go back maybe a few years back and you think of buying a OnePlus or something, or buying an iPhone 10, and one's $1,000 and the other one is like 500. One's got a Snapdragon blah blah blah, the other one's got this chip, and they basically do the exact same thing from a performance perspective. Maybe the camera's a little bit better. Like if you're rational, you want to save the $500 because all you're doing is browsing and sending messages. But we don't do that. We go for the $1,000 thing because there's social capital involved, there's signaling, flexing, and all this kind of stuff. That's not physical in a way. It's behavioral, sure, but it's this desire for kind of going beyond whatever is physical, and that's what I'm trying to capture. And so sneakers for me, and seeing the behaviors and the kind of the sociology of it, there's the finance side of it, was like, no, this is a great way to incentivize people to get out and move around, to collect.
Yes.
That was my first step into kind of building a future for spatial, like a spatial computing future, you're looking at your phone. It's not about throwing phones away. It's just about how does the phone become more like a remote control that lifts my head up, that I'm out in the world, I'm thrown out into the world instead of escaping back into the cave in this
Yes.
metaverse where I escape reality.
Yes.
So that was my goal with Aglet. And then part of that too was then understanding and learning the patterns of how people move around in space. And so, that obviously.
So before we get there, I think I know where you're going.
Yeah.
I do want to pause to have you point this out. So Aglet was you're motivating people to move around the world, giving them an opportunity to collect a digital item, delivering physical items to them. People that are unfamiliar with Aglet, definitely worth checking out. But I want you to highlight how, although it is sunset and you've moved on to building the smart map, it was a massive success. There was incredible user data that, I forget the numbers off the top of my head, but I think it's important to highlight because you got into this when you talked about your interest in philosophy, and you didn't become an academic. You wanted to be like the CEO who gets his products, his worldview into his products and out to the world. I think it's important to point out, because you're a very intellectual person. Sometimes people like that, as you probably observe too, just get caught thinking and they don't actually get into action. But that's not you. You are thinking and processing and at a very depthful level. But Aglet is an example of like action and productivity. So please share with us on that.
Yeah, sure. I think that goes to, well, part of it is having a good team.
Yeah.
So I can overthink and I can say things and people are like, what are you talking about? And then, but that's how you build a good team. You know, like you can't see Jesse over there is off camera, but like Jesse is somebody who's, I think, very helpful in like putting things into action. And then I have my co-founder, Owen, who's, he's a man of action as well. For him, he's ready to go and he wants to put things into play, kind of architect it out and like, okay, boom, let's go. So having a good team around you where you can complement maybe the overthinking with, practicality and like, okay, well, great, let's build, a teleporting business, but like, can we even, how do we build that? Who do we need for that? All those types of things. And so, for Aglet, it was having just like a really good team that understood exactly what people wanted. And I think really importantly, as a platform or a two-sided marketplace that tried to bring together brands and their needs, and then the fun and the kind of entertainment of playing the brand game was how do I bring those two groups of people together? And more importantly, in my worldview of like, how do I want to bring that into this product was there should be some learning as well in this. Like there should be, there needs to be a skill of like how you navigate the world. How do you move around in the city you're in? How do you discover new places around you? And so then that was like, well, how do local businesses kind of show up on this map where I can do partnerships with them to kind of get them to drive some traffic into their stores? So there was just the whole thing of like embodied intelligence sounds super academic and abstract, but it's really, if you think about how you move around in space and in the physical world, and you just kind of see the kind of unconscious, like it's not like you're a non-playable character, but it's kind of this unconscious intelligence you have to just move around in space. Like Jesse and I had a meeting this morning, and then we were walking back, and I mean, I've been to New York City a lot, but I never usually stay at the same place. And it was just like, I didn't even think about where I was going, but we just walked back to my hotel. And I didn't think about where to go or whatever. I just walked back. So there's this kind of thrownness into the world that we have and this intelligence to navigate, which goes back to the world model type stuff we're talking about. So Aglet was a way to kind of try to imagine sort of the perfect encapsulation of all these ideas while also trying to have fun and do something that's not super nerdy kind of academic type of a thing. It's like, no, how do these ideas get into, I think Christopher Nolan is one of my favorite directors, and he does this. I think he is the best at this. Every one of his movies is about time. So he's interested in the philosophy of time. And there's a lot of crazy stuff going on in his movies, but at the same time, he's making these blockbuster, action films that anybody can watch. And then maybe you have a a very kind of robust understanding of the philosophy of time and the physics of time. But if you don't, and you're just a casual observer and you watch it and you start thinking maybe for the first time, what is time actually? What is that? And then boom, you go down the rabbit hole of exploring like, wow, is there even such a thing as time? Is it in our heads? Do we project it on here? Then there's Newton and there's Einstein and now you start learning as well. So for me with Aglet, it was, like I said, there's that financial element to it. We had a secondary marketplace in the game. So you're walking around collecting these assets of these digital sneakers, apparel and everything. And then those are limited. So then you kind of have supply demand and there was an economic game that you're playing. And then when you collect certain rare assets, there's a secondary marketplace that you could go on and then flip those to earn Aglet, the currency.
Yep.
And then you're kind of building up this game. So it had a health side to it, physical, mental health side. Around walking around, we converted all your steps into a currency called Aglet, and then it was like walk, earn, collect was kind of the game loop. And then you do that, and then the more you collect some of the rare objects, then you're able to go and go into the shop and purchase certain items, or you could put the items that you've collected for somebody else to buy. And then you had kind of the arbitrage game that you're playing. And so for the brands, it was really interesting because then they could, on drop day for certain products, they could sort of build up some hype in our game before it actually dropped as a physical shoe on their website or whatever. We tried to connect the buy IRL button. So like, yeah, I get a shoe that comes out in a month or it comes out tomorrow, whatever. I have the digital one, but now I want the physical one. And a lot of it too was built on like Joe LaPuma and Complex of seeing, the sneaker shopping episodes and seeing like him bring in, like DJ Khaled or, who else? Some of the episodes I remember like Cristiano Ronaldo going in or who's the guy that spent like, I think it was Ronaldo spent like 35,000 or something or 100, or whatever. He would just bring in all these celebrities. And they had unlimited cash to just kind of be like, I want this, I want this, I want this. And then it rings up at the end, it's like 150,000. And all of us, if you're into that, that's like the dream, right? It's just walking in and being like, whatever. I want the Red Octobers. I want the Nike mags from Back to the Future. I want, the Jordan 1 Off-White, whatever. No big deal. I leave. And so, but 99% of us are never going to do that.
Right.
So the next best thing was how do you kind of simulate that
to
where I can move around and be physically active, which is a good thing. And it gets young people moving. And at the same time, it's converting that into a currency. That energy is converted into a currency. And now I can go and buy at least the digital version. And the idea was that to build up something like that, which then, I have the digital Jordan 1. How do I connect that to the physical one with the brands that I can kind of complete the story, so to speak? That was kind of the vision of it.
It's so cool, dude.
Yeah.
Aglet was amazing.
We had 4.5 million people that were playing this game every day. We had partnerships with most of the top brands. Nike hated us because when we first started, we were hustlers, and it was just like, well, if I know I worked at Adidas, so I know if I try to get contracts with all these brands, I would probably not even be talking about Aglet. I'd still be trying to get all of them. So I'm just going to do it. And my pitch to them will be, hey, this works. So yes, I did start just kind of using it, and it got successful. And then we did exactly that. But Nike just totally hated it, and we got a cease and dissertation. It was this massive like report on us, and and then later, like it was called Sneaker Crypt at the beginning, and then Nike did Crypto Kicks, and our vision was spot on. I think it was hard with the pandemic, so we had to work through that, and then ultimately, kind of what the downfall a little bit of Aglet was when with FTX and just kind of the digital marketplace stuff just kind of like fell off a cliff, and then we went from doing great in revenue every month to not doing so well in revenue. And then, then you have to make calls as a founder. And it was like, do we want to ride this out? I don't think, if we look at how Nike's performing, how Puma's performing, and, Adidas seems to be doing a little bit well, like much, much better than they have been. It hasn't really recovered yet. And so when that comes back, I have no idea if it ever will. And so I can't really simulate anything anymore. And Therefore, the main driver of collection is always the arbitrage. And if that's not there anymore, then it's not
Right.
there's not a game.
Yeah.
And there's certainly no revenue. And then there's not a company.
It was externalities, honestly.
Yeah,
Like looking
it was.
back on it, it was externalities.
And so then the good news, though, was we were building up an engine of understanding for the game. It was, sort of like the game engine of Fortnite or whatever game you're playing. There's an intelligence that's building up in the background that's trying to place these assets in the physical world to create a kind of, some uncertainty, some probability for where these things show up that you collect them. And so, closing down Aglet, but then having the spatial behavioral engine, which is kind of our patented technology, that then we can kind of copy and paste that to a number of different areas from a licensing perspective with, other spaces, whether it's, theme parks or, stadiums, spatial commerce, drones, whatever it is. Spatial intelligence, I think, is the future. And that was the play of starting Onlife. It was just, I have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And the sneakers start was everybody kind of looks at it as like, oh, neat. It's like a little sneaker game. And it's like, yeah, it is a sneaker game. That's true. But the goal is not to build a sneaker game. The goal is to build a location-based kind of spatial brain that powers an experience that is a game. But I want to be able to have that technology that I can then power all different kinds of experiences. So we shut down Aglet, and then we have now started building the Onlife app. And then there's kind of the second part of the business, which is more taking the spatial behavioral models and working with other brands to kind of fine-tune it for their own use cases.
Gotcha. Can you walk us through exactly what the product offering is? Because I think it's fascinating, and it's now we're getting back into like, oh, why did we open up with AI?
Yeah. So the Onlife's the company, and then there's the Onlife app, and the Onlife app is basically a personalized smart map. So it's trying to use machine learning, and it's trying to use neural networks. It's trying to use AI in a way that connects you to the world. And if you imagine it as most people use either Google Maps or Apple Maps, and at the same time, you're also using probably some Google Suite products like, Google Docs, reminders, to-dos, and your calendar. And how do you bring together those things? And as a fan of maps, especially like in Harry Potter, I mentioned earlier, like the Marauders map, I wanted to build like a digital map that's alive.
Yep.
And I think the best way to think about it is if you and I opened up, I've told you this before, but if you and I open up TikTok or Facebook or whatever and hit refresh, we see two completely different feeds of content because the underlying machine learning is responding and learning to what you're interested in, obviously, right? And then it's showing you that kind of content because it wants to keep you there, because it wants you to look at ads. But when you and I open Google Maps or Apple Maps, we see the exact same map. And so I'm trying to take kind of the logic or the machine learning that powers a feed and apply it to a map, so that when I open my map and you open your map, I see the New York City that I'm interested in engaging with, and you would see the New York City that you're engaging with. So you played baseball, so maybe, and you're interested in, I don't know, metal, and you're interested in, Mexican food and Italian food, and you're interested in these kind of parks, and you're a runner and whatever, blah, blah, blah. And when you open up that map, it's almost like New York City saying, come play with me.
Yeah.
And when I open my map and I'm interested in, bluegrass music and jazz, and I'm interested in shopping, and I'm interested in, whatever it is, right? It's all the things that I'm interested in. What the map is showing me is, come play with me.
Yes.
Come engage with the world out here.
Yes.
And so that's kind of exploration discovery. But I think the real thing is, what's the organizing principle of your day? And what we have found is that people, going back to my point earlier about the conflation of social media and the internet, we've talked to so many people now who are like, yeah, social media net negative. I'm just not interested. I'm getting off social media. I don't care. It's making my life worse. But what's the alternative? Like, where else do you go?
Yeah.
And so a lot of the people that we have like 30,000 people on a wait list already. We haven't even really released a product yet. There's something there that we've captured that people want an alternative. And where do they go for the alternative is they kind of become productivity focused. It's like, I don't want to stare at the technology. I want to use the technology to augment whatever it is I'm trying to accomplish. And most of these people, I want to flourish as a human being. I want to get better. I want to be more organized. I want to balance my life better, kind of the online, I'm always on and working, offline, my free time, I need to be on life. I need to have that balance there. And so I think this goes back to kind of an early view of technology, which was technology is there to help you accomplish certain tasks, not replace, human ability in accomplishing that. And I remember that Google, what was it called? The keynote that they did were like, now the phones were like making phone calls for you type of a thing. So it's really about how you live in relation to technology, and building a personalized smart map is about, I hope, helping you connect to the world, but also just helping you live your life and not get lived by something else.
Yep.
So you have the people who are maybe going away from social media, then they're going to productivity, and then they've been thinking about, well, AI looks really interesting and all this kind of stuff, but how do you bring all those things together? A new alternative that uses new emerging technologies in a way that like is designed to help me live life better. And that kind of goes to the alignment question, I think. So for me, it's about maps, and thinking about how do we use maps as kind of a new interface. So instead of a feed and timeline and thumb dance, it's what a map does, I think, is kind of show you in a context. You are in a world, and you're moving around in that world. And how do I use intelligence as kind of your co-pilot or your assistant or your coach to kind of help you move around in the world to find the types of things that you want to do?
Yeah.
And it also helps you, hopefully, keep your day on track. So it's literally you're opening up the app in the morning. Good morning, Ryan. You've got, your world today is basically like a 6-kilometer radius, and you've got 7 things that you have to do today, and I can see them on the map. 4 of them are personal, 3 of them are work related, and so that's 7 things you need to get done today. And set for me the one goal you want to get done today. Okay, I want to meditate, or work out, or whatever, or spend time with my son or my daughter or my wife or whatever. That's my goal today. Yeah, there's my other stuff, but like the one thing is this. Okay, boom, let's go. Like I'm going to help you do that.
Yeah.
Let's go. Boom. So I generate my day, and now I look at, again, like a Google Maps or Apple Maps. I see my day on a map, and I start living my day. I'm going through it, and now your day. When you think about what a day is, most people think of the day as like, if they think about it at all, it's kind of this like monster of like, oh man, like my day's crazy, or like I feel underwater. I'm just, so if you think about Duolingo of a lesson, I'm trying to make the day a lesson.
Yeah.
The day is like a quest, and I need to win the day. So what I'm trying to do is use mapping, use spatial intelligence in a way that helps us win the day. I get my stuff done so that, and I've explored the world. I've lived. And when I hit my head on the pillow at night, what I think is, I lived today. I didn't get lived. How do you achieve that type of balance? And then you've kind of got this assistant that's helping you kind of through the day to keep on track of stuff. And it's doing it hopefully in a real-time way that, okay, Carl had to cancel the meeting. All right, Jesse and I have an extra 2 hours now. What should we do? Well, MoMA's on the way to where you're going, so why don't you go to MoMA? Here you can buy tickets, So I think that's an interesting and a more compelling view of the future of humans and other types of intelligences working together in a way for human flourishing. I think that's going to the human alignment thing. And Aglet for me was kind of that initial exploration of trying to figure out how that would all work. And then now it's building this new app, and then it's talking to a lot of businesses who are also trying to figure out how to use spatial data and spatial experiences to, build really cool experiences for the fans of their brand, whether it's a NBA stadium or something, and you go in, and how do you kind of understand movement in the stadium to build up a cool experience as a fan. For credit card purchases or something like that. If you use, let's say, American Express, and you fly to Rome, or I fly here to New York City, and I get an email from American Express that's like, hey, go see the Statue of Liberty and the Empire State Building. It's like, dude, you've got my credit card purchase history. You know what I like. Why not tell me, hey, here's the cool stuff we know you like that you'll want to do. So there's not really that personalized side to it, and there's no spatial side to it. So you can do it a little bit with large language models and stuff like that. Like we've seen some recent announcements with Google Maps and even Mapbox and OpenAI. So there's the large language model approach, which we're doing that as well. But there's the models underneath it that, like a Facebook doing it, how they do it with the feed or TikTok's feed. There's a real time thing that I'm going at. Not quite there yet, but that's where we're working toward.
So when Aschenbrenner talks about ChatGPT, he says, he's like measuring the orders of magnitude, and he's trying to convince people like, don't bet against this stuff. It's learning rapidly. He says ChatGPT 1 is like a preschooler. 2 is like a 8th grader. And then by 4, like we're, scoring in the 99th percentile of like really difficult professional tests, right? How do you think about what you're building that way, and like where are you at?
Well, we're definitely at the beginning of a lot of the stuff, and I think it's an interesting question because maybe an underlying thing there is, I think, something we talked about, which is kind of what it is to be a founder in this space today. When you look at, OpenAI, and Anthropic is raising, Perplexity is raising a just an insane round at the moment. Like they're a $9 billion valuation or whatever, isn't it? $9 billion valuation. They were 500 million like a year ago. And then you look at the rapid pace of what these companies are releasing, like the Claude models, the computer use. I don't know if you saw the computer use case. Just like it's absurd stuff that they're releasing at such a rapid pace. But then you think, okay, that's great, but how did they get there? And so the amount of capital required to like train these models, all the pre-training, fine-tuning, the expenditure on like talent, so it's like it used to be you could have when we started a 500K seed round. And now it's like a 500 million seed round that you need to build this kind of stuff. And so the kind of density of the location of where you have to be to access that, I think kind of reinforces the old approach of like there are these hubs where for a while I think it was starting to change, where you could kind of be anywhere and start these companies, and now it's like, well, you kind of have to be in these certain spots where all this capital is. And so nothing against Sam Altman, but like he hustled and did his thing and got to a point where he had this amazing network. But like look at OpenAI, where you've got Musk as a co-founder, he funds it, puts in 200 million or whatever. You've got Thiel back. It's like billions of dollars that go into this. And then you start thinking about, you kind of have to have the backing of Microsoft, of Amazon, Facebook.
And additionally, though,
in order to have the cloud credits to be able to even do any of this stuff.
And additionally, the large language models relative to what you are building, and just the accessibility of the data, right? Where ChatGPT trained off of whatever was on the internet. Like we could download PDFs of college students, scholarly articles, whatever, and just start reading, and that data was readily accessible. It sounds like it's more difficult to do what you're doing with a spatial model.
Yeah, because it's like the chicken and egg problem of, okay, well, what data do we have to train spatial models on spatial data, spatial movement data, right? So that's kind of, Aglet was, part of that. But you've got sort of like what we did with Aglet, where we just kind of proceeded permissionlessly with using, some of these sneakers, these digital designs and stuff. That's exactly what these brands did as well, or these companies did as well, was just kind of using the data however they saw fit, and then sort of retroactively the companies had to, oh, hey, you're not, New York Times suing, whatever. So similar thing that we had to go through. But I just think that we're in this, it's not only that AI and machine learning and all this stuff is like a fundamental, or let's say machine intelligence is not only a fundamental paradigm change of like our lives as consumers. I think it's also a fundamental paradigm change of how you start a company. And it's changing, like I said, my son, Tristan's not probably, if he gets into this, he's not going to build an app. He's going to build an agent. He's going to leverage an intelligent agent to go do stuff for humans. And so, well, where is that going to be? It's probably not going to be on an app store on the iPhone. It's probably, so where these companies are going are kind of, I think, what Google and Facebook and a number of other companies did to replace and kind of eclipse a lot of the companies of the 80s and 90s and the 2000s. I think what we're witnessing is sort of the changing of the guard of some of these new companies that are building now platforms on top of which people are going to be building these new types of agents. So then as a founder, now you have to kind of make this play of, well, it almost seems impossible to go and build the kind of the foundational model perspective, because it needs just so much capital that most of us aren't in the position, to be able to get this kind of talent to help build all this stuff. So that means most people have to now build on top of these and leverage these platforms. And that's where these companies will be. I think we'll see the first, quadrillion-dollar company emerge will be here in one of these companies.
Yeah.
Maybe it's OpenAI, maybe it's a newer one, whatever. But it'll have to be someone that has leveraged the existing internet infrastructure that's already owned by, a third of the internet runs on AWS, for example. Yeah. So, and then Google Cloud Platform, and you've got Facebook and Azure and Oracle. So it's like those companies sort of own it all. And it goes back actually to the question about the metaverse and the origins of cyberpunk and kind of the naivete of we're going to escape the physical world and we kind of own the digital space. And it's like, well, we kind of forgot that the digital space isn't merely digital.
Yeah, it's physical.
And that goes to the online-offline distinction too, is that in order to have the online dimension, you need cables, you need all this physical infrastructure. Power, and they still owned it all. Yeah. And then what happened was, okay, now the digital space became this, you read the news and if you don't read the news, you're uninformed. If you read the news, you're kind of misinformed. Yeah. What do you do? And it's like, because now who owns what and who, the mediation and all of it. And now it's like another attempt of, well, how do we create a different future and a different alternative? Yeah. And that's again the kind of online, offline thing of we're offline right now. We're looking for a new online of like, well, what do we do next? Yeah. And so I think as a founder, it's really interesting at the moment. And language models are interesting. Large language models are interesting, and these models are interesting because the new programming language seems to be English. And so, using some of these models, just kind of telling it, hey, I want to do blah, 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 and it just spits out some Python for you that you then, so
new
it's like,
programming language is English.
You can do, and that's where, okay, now it unlocks a whole new opportunity space, a whole new space of innovation, but now it doesn't seem that it's happening on, Worldwide Developer Conference in Cupertino or, at Google I/O. Now it's sort of, maybe it's changing, even if those companies are, half owned by Google or whatever, Yeah.
So. I mean, on this topic, you said something very interesting to me that's really relevant today. I mean, everybody's talking about Elon Musk's acquisition of Twitter. Yeah. It's $44 billion acquisition. And the thing everybody's talking about is the influence and power that he gained for $44 billion. And whether you think Elon is good, evil, whatever, looks pretty genius. What I hadn't really thought about was not only did he join the discussion, the political forum game when he acquired Twitter,
Yeah.
he also acquired all of that, all of those data, all of those servers, all of their farms of servers,
Yeah.
all of their compute, and now can play in the wherever
Yeah.
this is all going game.
Yeah. When we look at the history of Elon Musk and sort of what he's trying to do with all these different companies, is he's building. I mean, Tesla is an energy company and it's an AI company, and it just so happens that the platform on which those two things happen is an automobile. So yeah, sure, electric cars. But I think if you've paid attention to how he's been talking throughout being, his ownership stake in Tesla, being CEO of Tesla and all that, is he's talking about space exploration. He's talking about energy creation and energy capture. And then he's, one of the co-founders and one of the main financial backers of OpenAI. And so he's been interested in AI for a while. And Sam Altman's the same. Sam Altman started also a social map company called Loop.
Yep.
Like he had an exit in that, goes and does Y Combinator, and then basically wants to go into AI as well. So him and Musk kind of joining forces there with their network, starting OpenAI. And I'm not like an insider or something, but just from what I've read, it's actually a new book that came out called Supremacy, which is about a lot of this internal.
Like the political,
Just kind of the internal
stuff
that kind of goes on about, okay, what are these people trying to do? But basically all these kind of disagreements about what we mentioned at the beginning, like it being an accelerationist versus being a bit more cautious in this, and making this open sourcing it. And, he made the joke that it's like closed AI. And what's good? Is it good to open source it? Is it good to keep it proprietary? And Musk's whole goal was to make it open source. That's kind of how he's rolled with most of the stuff with Tesla self-driving and all that kind of stuff. So I think that you're right, that I think really what's happening is Musk buying Twitter is not to get access to the a social platform for like merely political purposes. I think it's how do you be part of the game of scaling out AI and the future of artificial intelligence. I mean, obviously he's more on that cautious side. He's close with people like Nick Bostrom at the Future of Life Institute at Oxford. And he's kind of in that camp of like, we need to pump the brakes and be cautious about this. But he also wants, I don't know if he actually thinks that, or if it's just like, he does whatever he has to do to be one of the main participants. Yeah. And if you want to be one of the main participants, as we said, this is not just like I build an app or whatever. It's a whole new, as Aschenbrenner says correctly, I think, it's a whole new industrial revolution that's happening. And it requires energy creation, energy capture. It requires massive infrastructure on GPUs. So therefore, partnerships with NVIDIA, partnerships with all these new emerging companies. Yep. It just requires insane amounts of ecosystem of stuff. Yeah. And capital. I think just kind of surveying, all the different evidence, all the stuff that's happened, that it does seem like he needs himself to get into the OpenAI, the AI race. Yeah. And so what does he then need in the tool belt, so to speak, in order to be an active and leading participant? Mm-hmm. And therefore you need some infrastructure. Yeah. And he's in the position, being the richest man in the world, that he can just buy his own infrastructure for that. Mm-hmm. And then I think where it really gets interesting, and then it goes back to the stuff talking about being a philosopher, or being an idea person, and then kind of baking that stuff into your company. Mm-hmm. Is a lot of the circles that he roams around in, thinking about the future, is thinking about like, what is the future of humanity? Mm-hmm. And I think with an energy company like he has, and Solar City, SpaceX and Tesla, one of the main things in this space is something called the Kardashev scale. And it's from this Russian cosmologist who developed these different scales of planetary scales of energy capture. Mm-hmm. And then the correlation between the civilizations that create and capture the most energy, or just capture the available energy, and then social and political and economic progress. So the civilizations that capture the most energy are then correlated with, faster progress of growth and kind of growthism.
Got you.
So right now, we don't obviously we don't capture 100% of the available energy. So the goal is how do you get to that point where not only are you how do we capture the most possible energy, and then how do you put that energy to use to then grow society? And I think that's ultimately what's going on, is that in kind of that whole thing, AI will need to be powered by more energy, as we know. And then if you bring in the intelligence side of things and you start thinking about post-humanism and kind of all these things about, what is the future of humanity? Is intelligence only embodied within kind of organic matter, or can it have a silicon substrate or something like that? And then if it's about spreading kind of humanity and spreading intelligence out into the galaxy, into the universe, well then, obviously that plays into a little bit of the accelerationism that's part of this like more cosmic, this cosmic view of intelligence. And so I just think that I haven't seen Musk talk about this that much, but it does seem like one missing piece was just having his own infrastructure where he could then build up now XAI. He has Grok. He's open sourced a lot of this stuff. So it just seems like everything kind of adds up into this direction of where's the future going? What's the future of humanity? What's the future of governance? And also then what is the future of how governments, science, capital, and innovation are all kind of working together into this new kind of geopolitical situation. So for me, the Twitter acquisition is less about I'm going to buy this kind of social platform to voice my views. I mean, from a political perspective, he's done like a complete 180. Not that he was a big lefty or something, but he was definitely more aligned with, I think, more progressive views. And then there's suddenly this big switch. And what is the reason for that? I think why did he make that switch? Obviously I don't know, but like there's just been some interesting things that he's done. And for me, the Twitter move is the more he talks and the more we all talk about Elon Musk and all the stuff that he's talking about, the more content is generated on Twitter that you want that content because you want to train it on that. And I think that's where it starts to get weird, is now everybody kind of having the proprietary data on which to train these models. And so it's sort of a new kind of like walled garden where Apple has their ecosystem and everybody talks about being locked into the ecosystem. But part of that now, Apple Intelligence, and you've got Gemini, you've got all these different companies building their own models. But once we get away from that idea of like these models can just train on anything freely, and people may be starting to monetize that data, well then for Twitter, it's now we have access to, one of the main public forums of language and discourse that we can train those models on this. And he owns this platform. So now he has his own thing. And if we look at a lot of the Twitter or now X APIs, they've cut a lot of the API access to Twitter. So now, again, it becomes kind of a proprietary language that that his models can train on. And so he's way behind. I think his plan was probably to take over OpenAI, and it didn't work. So, then I think, what do I have to do? I have to start my own thing then. And I'm just going to buy Twitter, have access to the infrastructure, and then I'm going to build my own AI. And I am the richest man in the world. I have the richest people in my network. And I can accelerate that because OpenAI has been around for a decade, had all this time training. And so what he's accomplished actually in the last 2 or 3 years, just with Grok and the stuff that he's been doing is actually pretty impressive. There's also Elon time, whatever he's saying about how advanced it is or whatever is usually, you have to divide it by. So, I agree with you. I think that's what's going on. And then I think, again, that just... that we can take it in kind of the direction of science. And I think, Eric Schmidt and the Kissinger book, Age of AI, I think they really go into that interesting thing of the future of science and the future of AI unlocking a lot of these secrets
Yeah.
of the universe, and that's Demis Hassabis, the founder of DeepMind. That was his whole goal with this. We mentioned Sam Altman using maps and social maps. Demis Hassabis went in the direction of training AI on games, and we mentioned games. So what I'm trying to do is actually bring together the Sam Altman view of the social maps,
Yeah.
and then AI, and then the gaming side of it, of looking things as a game and movement, is what Hassabis trained his models on.
Yeah.
And then, he just won a Nobel Prize for the AlphaFold in chemistry. And so that's, if you start thinking about Parkinson's and cancer and all these different secrets that are still unlocked,
Yeah.
that are still closed to us, we don't know. And then you start thinking about, well, if countries now have these intelligences that they can unleash to kind of unlock these secrets, and then it kind of becomes this proprietary thing of, well, now progress and the growth of these countries based on the intelligence that they have that they're using and unleashing.
Yeah.
It's this weird kind of, again, space race type thing of the Cold War and this battle between like Russia and the United States. Now, if you've seen For All Mankind, the Apple TV Plus show is actually quite good. So I think that's what Aschenbrenner's getting to in that last part of like the battle of China and kind of this competitive side of things.
Yeah.
But then using and building an intelligence is where it becomes kind of scary. And I think Musk, being the richest man in the world and being one of the most innovative people around, bit of a weird guy in many ways, but like obviously a guy with the means to be able to be an active leader and participant in the space. He had to make that move.
Yeah.
And do that. And I think what we've seen is now with his involvement in the new Trump administration, he's obviously positioned himself to.
Yeah, his influence is crazy.
He's positioned himself to be another leader, and he's tried to sue OpenAI multiple times, and about contract breach over the move from nonprofit to profit.
Yeah.
So, I think it's Musk is one of these guys that I'm a big fan of Musk. I always have been from early Tesla days, and I'm excited to see where he goes with XAI and Grok and Tesla.
Yeah.
And for me, Tesla is he's an example of doing both at the same time. He has Grok and language models, but he also, with Tesla Vision and SpaceX, I mean, they can send a freaking rocket and then fly it back. How's that happening?
Yeah.
So it's an example of spatial intelligence.
Yeah.
Self-driving it's the farthest along of any other automotive company. That's also spatial intelligence, spatial computing. I think that's the more interesting step than like VR and AR and like headwear and all this kind of stuff. I find this to be, it's always been this kind of dream that we're going to strap on a computer on our face and like walk around. And it's like, I think you see it a little bit more with like these types of frames.
Yeah.
Okay. But I think the bigger stuff is like that kind of stuff. Logistics,
Yeah.
autonomous robots, drone technology, self-driving, and then all the kind of stuff we mentioned earlier. I think that's the space, and Musk is definitely in a position to benefit from having that vision instead of focusing on the hardware thing right here in front of my face. We're in computation.
Yeah.
Computation is just extended out into the world, and we're moving in it. And what's the operating system that's running that? What's the intelligence behind the scenes as that gets smarter and smarter? There's actually another thing to mention here. I'm rambling a bit now, but
go for it.
There's a science fiction writer. He died recently. His name's Ian Banks, and he wrote I think it's a 7 or 8 volume series. It's called the Culture series, and this is one of Musk's favorite science fiction series. And basically, it's one of these stories of like an all-knowing kind of super powerful, super intelligent AI that sort of completely changed the entire fabric, social fabric, economic fabric, to lead to a state of abundance. And everybody's kind of living in the consequences of that. We're living in AI, and that's kind of what we mentioned earlier, right? Is that like AI is not something over there.
Yeah.
It's not on my phone and I'm over here and then there's AI. It's like, no, you're in it.
Yeah.
Sounds matrixy, but it's like, no, you're now in computation.
Yeah.
you can't. It doesn't matter. You can't escape it.
Yeah.
If you go on a digital detox and go in the woods and live in a tree house or something for the weekend, like it doesn't matter because your identity is now distributed out in all these systems that somebody's still liking one of your posts or something that you have. Maybe your car payment is still coming off your account. Maybe your employer is depositing your check into your bank account. Things are still happening on your identity in a digital space. It just so happens that part of you has gone into the woods or whatever.
Yeah.
Even if you didn't bring your phone, like
Yeah.
it doesn't. You probably drove there somehow. So maybe your car, or did you? I don't know. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
but you're just in it now.
Yeah.
And Musk seems to be taking a lot of his influences and those ideas from that culture series, and then trying to build, something similar. And then he's attaching it to a lot of ideas around, like the Russian cosmists from this guy, the Kardashev scale stuff that I'm talking about. And it's a future where we need to capture more energy if we want to continue to grow. Because at some point, there's something called cleodynamics, which is this whole view of a really interesting view of complexity theory and the evolution of civilizations, and how at some point it seems like civilizations reach a certain or cross a certain threshold where the system itself just becomes too expensive to run. And it's so distributed that it kind of loses its chain of command in a sense. And it's kind of this runaway thing, but it's so expensive that it just kind of dies out. There's a book on this that came out recently that's pretty interesting. And it seems like if we don't figure it out of how we can capture more energy to power all of this stuff, are we kind of on the brink of a kind of downfall of the current, system that we've all known and loved and benefited from for the past, 40 years, really, And I think that's kind of what we're seeing is we're in this weird moment, politically and sociopolitically, economically, where everything just kind of seems to be on a knife's edge of like, chaos, or like what I think all the ways that we've thought about how the world works seem to be kind of changing.
Yeah.
And many of the ways that were our default settings we're kind of relating to them ironically. It's like questions of like democracy, questions of, certain ways of governance. We do them, but it's almost like, are these still effective? That those types of debates seem to be happening now in a way that they weren't happening. I think you even had Peter Thiel say something like a while back of like, I don't know if, capitalism and democracy, these types and liberalism, do all those things still go together? And for a while, we just assumed that they did. And now it seems to be like, for whatever reason, we're now asking these types of questions again. You have the kind of socialist kind of millennial group, and then you've got kind of all these different groups that are emerging and asking these questions again. And then I think it's like, where does this go from here? And I think if I'm good at anything, it's not that I'm a fortune teller or a future teller or something like that. It's just, I think that what I'm interested in is trying to figure out the possible directions that things can go, and then trying to rewind backward and understand, well, what has to be true in order for the most probable outcome to happen. And I like if my son drops a bunch of Legos on the floor, if he pours out a bucket of Legos, I don't know what he will build, but I do know what the pieces are. And in some sense, I can maybe make inferences around, well, given the pieces, what can you construct? And if you want to construct something and maybe there's a missing piece, well, then there's innovation and that can go together. So we might not be able to predict exactly the future, but you can definitely, on a meta or a second order level, know what the pieces are currently and then extrapolate forward.
Do you think that, I think it's interesting, like watching China develop things relative to America develop things. Like we have complete different ideals, social structures, governments, but like we see a lot of similar outcomes. And then when you like look at the differences, like they kind of make sense, right? Like this was built in communist China. It looks the technology looks a lot like it looks like in America, but the fine characteristics of it dictate or show you where it was from. Do you think that AI and all of these things developing. I guess we'll start with like speed of developing.
Yeah.
Do you think it's going to happen faster here, or do you think it's going to happen faster where there's like a centralized government kind of dictating every little thing?
Yeah. I always find it's always hard to talk about China because I mean, it's not like I have tons of Chinese friends or something, but when I do talk to people from China and I just bludgeon them with kind of the Western media view of China.
Yeah.
And they're always just kind of laughing at it. Like
Yeah.
the idea is of this, all powerful, all knowing, centralized government that has the social credit system and they understand every single thing that's happening and they're tracking and surveying everything, and people disappearing and going against the system. And when I say that kind of stuff, it's kind of like humorous. They find it funny because when you look at the social credit system there, it's not as sort of dystopian or as effective as the Western media portrays it. So I always just find it hard because I don't know
Yeah.
actually how it works in China.
Yeah.
I just have no clue. I've read a bunch of books on it, on AI and the United States and China, and Chip Wars is a great book, and listening to Eric Schmidt and Kissinger and blah blah blah. It's just all this talk about this stuff, and I think ultimately, like, I just don't know because it's so hard to understand actually how they're doing it, and actually how effective any of this stuff is. I've never even been there.
Yeah.
But going into, I've read a lot of books about Alibaba. Alibaba is a big influence on me in terms of my thinking about spatial computing and spatial intelligence, just given how they design their grocery stores and just how seamless it is, like the Amazon Go store where you walk in, get some stuff and come out, and it doesn't really work there. It's like scaled up, like that happens all the time. You have kiosks where nobody's even in there.
Yeah. It
scans your face, you walk in, take some stuff and leave. And to me, that's part of spatial computing, or So it seems like they're way more advanced. But then the idea of building like AGI or building an underlying kind of social intelligence, or like an operating system that's intelligent, that is kind of a world brain. It just seems like no one who will get there first. It almost seems like the U.S. Because it's decentralized in a way relative to China, it seems like it would be faster.
Yeah.
Just because there's so many points of failure that are like failure vectors that are in the more centralized approaches.
Yeah.
And that just kind of the open structure of, in many ways, how the United States is, just kind of like it goes where it goes. Is scary for some. And because then if you apply that to the idea of AI, and it just kind of goes where it goes. If it doesn't then align with human values, then now you're back to the paperclip maximizer situation. So I don't really know, just because I don't know. I only have these like indirect reports and books and articles and stuff that I read about China, and then I usually test those with people that I meet from China, and I immediately go into these types of discussions, and they always just kind of laugh about it, like, nah, I don't, dude, I think you're like orders of magnitude in your fantasy about what China is actually. So I don't. I guess my answer is I don't know.
Well, let me ask you this: you said that the decentralization, the competition, I'll call it, in America, could be more efficient and ideal for development. Is that the case? And I would imagine you'll say yes because you're building something. But is that really the case in America, where we just talked about how there's very few players that have the competitive advantages to be able to play in the AI race, like Elon Musk? He had to go acquire something. He's playing a really high-level strategy game. He's got the energy solutions. He's got the political influence solutions, and now he's got the compute data solutions. It seems to me like these things are really centralizing, and maybe we're not as like competitive and decentralized, at least in the topic of AI. But then, you know, even more than that, you are somebody who is competing in this space, and you know, you're not resourceless. You know, like you've covered ground, and we have a lot of hope for what you're building. You know, what's the state of that? You know,
Yeah. Well, I think it's definitely like it's not that it's definitely not decentralized.
Yeah.
The crypto was the same. It was like this
Yeah.
decentralization thing, and it's like, yeah, okay, great. Who's owning all this stuff anyway, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's the same. I think it's ultimately it's about I think the decentralization centralization binary is really just about.
We'll call it open competition. You know,
Yeah.
I think that's
Well, I
that's
think
a better way.
it's the difference between like who owns the platform and then who's free to kind of build what they want on top of these platforms.
Okay.
So it's almost like land ownership.
Yeah.
It's like the new land ownership is who's going to own the land, the AI land,
Yeah.
and all the resources.
Yeah.
So it's not dissimilar to what we talked about with the this kind of the cyberspace,
Gotcha.
cyberpunk origin, where it was kind of like the illusion was that we're kind of going off to the Wild West and we're just going to build all this new stuff. And then the reality kind of kicks in of like, well, in order to build all that new stuff, we need physical infrastructure and energy, and we need all these things that we didn't maybe think about. And who owns all those things? So the same people that were the condition for you wanting to leave and build something new in the first place. And I think here it's kind of just a repeat of this cycle of the people who have the most capital and the most influence generally are the ones that will own the underlying infrastructure, on top of which then people will innovate.
Gotcha.
And I think the spectrum of centralization, decentralization, you can kind of be on the somewhere in that spectrum. And I don't think the United States is like as on the decentralized side as kind of the fantasy of it. And I also don't think that in China, maybe it's as far on the centralization spec. So I think it's this kind of spectrum.
Yeah.
And, what seems, I think the real question is just going to be who's going to build the new platform where new entrepreneurs, new innovators that are trying to figure out how they can come up with new use cases to leverage artificial intelligence, machine learning, neural networks, deep learning, all these different things that might even emerge that we don't even know about, world models maybe, or spatial intelligence, how you build on top of that to kind of innovate and solve problems. I think that's where we're going. And then it's like, okay, what's the difference between that and what we've had before? And I think it ultimately comes down to the whole phase of the internet that we've grown up in and lived in our generation has been mobile, social, and cloud. And the whole cloud infrastructure has been really the phone, and these devices are like dumb terminals. Really, I hit a few buttons, it sends a request off to some server, and it sends back something that I stare at.
Yeah.
Sure, it's evolved a bit since then with phones kind of more locally, some of the AI and machine learning that's happening on device. But for the most part, with your phone, you're just you're just staring at it, and maybe you hit some buttons and click or whatever. But for the most part, it's again society of the spectacle. It's a dumb terminal where stuff's happening way over there, but it's sending it back here. And I think the big change is when you start thinking about that. Instead of democratizing like search and democratizing access to information via search, now you're starting to think about we've now creating a new kind of intelligence where you democratize access to intelligence. And now what do you do with this new kind of intelligence that can go off and do things? And so I don't think it's dissimilar to like high frequency trading where you've got, on Wall Street, you've got all these different companies who have a lot of their own proprietary, almost like agents, financial agents that are going off and finding inefficiencies, finding patterns in the market, finding trends, making purchases, and then hoping that those trades later will benefit with some profits, right? I think credit scores and all this kind of stuff is another one of like it's also using machine learning and AI to calculate and make predictions about who to offer something to, who not to offer something to. and it's off, almost out of sight, doing stuff, which is a very different model than, again, me hitting a request and it just sends me back something.
Right.
So I think that's the interesting thing to think about is we have 6 companies worth over $1 trillion. I think that's right. And they're all kind of rooted in this notion of dumb terminal search, visual content displayed in front of me, which is how Google or Alphabet is what, 90%, 92, 3% advertising revenue. Facebook's like 95, 96% advertising revenue. So they've all kind of built this model of make things machine readable so you can apply algorithms to them, aggregate attention, and then advertise. That's basically been the model.
Yep.
So now it's more, I think OpenAI seems to be kind of copy and pasting that model with this move to as a profit-driven company. I think everybody ends up trying to figure out how they can advertise. But I just think that the interesting way in which we're going is that maybe it sounds dystopian actually a little bit now that I start thinking about it, but just this idea of agents and intelligence that have been democratized and people are creating it that can then just go off and do things.
So in that situation, you are, and Onlife is, using the platform, democratized access to create an agent, which you're building is the smart map.
Yeah. So the platform is, it's a map. It's a digital map of the real world.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of, I guess in China, you think of like WeChat was sort of ahead of the game as well. I mean, WeChat was sort of an operating system on an operating system. It was its own little life operating system, and there were many apps. You could get your bank, you could get loans, you could call an Uber, you could get whatever I forgot the name of the Chinese version, but the map was the platform. But that platform was on another operating system on whatever phone you were using.
Yep.
And so I don't think it's too dissimilar to that. It's like the super app idea of having the Onlife app that's sort of a life operating system that is using machine intelligence to try to help you navigate, get your day on track, find the things out in the world that you're trying to do. And then instead of it being like you think of like Snapchat, who's got, when you open the map and you've got, what's the ticketing company? Sorry, Ticketmaster.
Ticketmaster, yeah.
You've got Ticketmaster. You've got, you could imagine having Tesla supercharger stations around. You could imagine, okay, where are all the Whole Foods? Where are all the whatever? And again, you kind of start building. It's like you're crafting your world. Those are like, we've called them lenses, but really it's more like agents.
Yeah.
What would an Airbnb agent be on a map?
Gotcha.
What would the Tesla agent be on the map?
Yeah.
What would the NBA or the Slam on the map? So now you've it's not that it's merely displaying information to me, which is still useful. It has utility, but it's more like, what if those could do things on a map? So if you think of it, there's something called generative agents that there's a really cool paper on this. Maybe we could link it in the bio or something, but it's called generative agents. It was a study done at Stanford in I think it's the human interface department, but they created these generative agents, 25 gen agents in The Sims. And then they just build up their profiles and then just kind of like let them loose in The Sims. And then let's see what happens. And so what I would like to do, this isn't really the Onlife app, but taking that idea in a different direction would be, what about a map of the physical world where you had 25 to 30 different agents that maybe they are, you're basically giving them certain goals and certain outcomes that they're seeking, and maybe you give them a little bit of means, and then you unleash them in a map of Manhattan, and then you see what they do. What types of strategies do they form to reach those goals? What kind of alliances do they build? Where does the antagonisms come in? Where are the tensions? And then how that plays out. And then you can run that simulation hundreds and hundreds of times to try to see like, well, okay, what are the patterns that happen here?
Right.
And you could do that for a number of different things that are really interesting. So I think for me, it's yes, the map becomes a new platform on top of which you can build things. And when we look at maps like Google Maps or Apple Maps, they're obviously useful, no doubt, but the utility is they're very functional. It helps me get from A to B, or I can see a delivery truck at B coming to A.
Yeah.
I can pin some locations, that kind of stuff. But what if the map the map for the territory is on this map, things are happening. The map's alive.
Yeah.
It's on life. It's living. And that's for me the world brain.
In age of AI, they use the example of creating really effective antibiotics and looking at different molecules or whatever they're looking at, and then looking back at trying to even understand how the AI predicted which molecules would become the most effective antibiotics. A was succeeding in finding things that humans couldn't find, and then humans could not even understand why the AI was right. Yeah. But they could see that it worked.
Yeah, like DeepMind, the game against in AlphaGo, when it played against Lee Sedol, and I think it was like the third game. I don't know. Actually, I don't know which game it was, but it was one of the games. There a specific move that it made in the game, and it made everyone's like, haha, look, this dumb move. Look, it's hallucinating. Like, whatever. And then I might be making this up, but
don't let the facts get in the way of a good story.
I do know I might be hallucinating, but I do know that at one point in the game, Lee Sedol like left and went out and smoked.
Okay.
I don't know if that was his reaction to this move, but he did later say something like that move, like no human would make that move. Like it just doesn't make any sense, but it's a genius move. Yeah. Like that move changed everything. Yeah. And so now it goes back to that question we were asking earlier about, well, if you're trying to, if humans and how we approach problem solving and, thinking of, Parkinson's as a problem to be solved, or thinking of intelligence even as like something to solve instead of it being like a riddle almost. But if you approach it from that engineering mindset of it, no, these are all problems to be solved. Like now, death, life elongation, all that. Like death is a problem to be solved. It's not an inevitable fact of life. It's just no, we have to solve it. If you approach it that way, then what you then need is you need computation, and you need energy, and you need to run these simulations. And running those simulations, I'm talking about running them on a map, but when you look in the sciences, I have a buddy who does cancer research, and I remember once him asking me, "Hey, do you want to come to Cambridge and I'll show you, what I'm doing?" And I'm thinking like, old school, like he's scribbling on paper and coming up with all this interesting stuff, and like literally his job was just sit there and listen to a computer like make sounds. Yeah. And then he would go read the data. And so it really is this question of the future of all the stuff we've talked about, of how all this stuff now kind of comes together in this constellation of harnessing new kinds of intelligence in conjunction with humans and capital, energy, all this different stuff coming together to try to solve many of these seemingly intractable problems that have defined, all civilizations for forever. Yeah. And then it's, okay, who's going to own the resources to be able to do that? And that's what we're seeing. That's why Musk would make the decision to do that. That's why, to bring it back to the beginning, that's why Aschenbrenner's saying that about the geopolitical consequences of all of this is it's like a true paradigm change. And there's obvious fear around that of just not knowing where it goes. Yeah. And a lot of people obviously have issue with the idea that it's just going to be this runaway thing and we just kind of let it go where it goes, which is kind of that radical accelerationist view. And then there's the decelerationist view of, well, maybe we need to pump the brakes and be a bit safe and make sure it aligns with human values or whatever. And then if you think, oh, this just sounds very academic and who really has the radical accelerationist type view? Well, it's like, well, just go and look at, Mark Andreessen writing a paper in defense of accelerationism, or look at any of these people that you follow in their little, X bios of being an accelerationist or a e-accelerationist. Sam Altman has in his I don't know if he still has it, but E backslash ACC. And that's the effective accelerationist, which is kind of this hybrid of.
Is that what you would call yourself?
I think that's a good question, actually. I think I kind of bounce around. I think it's hard to understand. Like, I don't know yet. I think I've been thinking about this for a really long time. One of my a master's thesis that I wrote has a chapter on kind of the rationalist community, and in Berkeley there's kind of that it's called MIRI, the Machine Intelligence Research Institute. So it's that whole rationalist community of like Yudkowsky, Robin Hanson, and I've read a lot of their stuff and have followed it for years and years, and hit Yudkowsky's movements and starting all these different blogs and stuff. And I've been to Oxford, and there's Oxford Internet Institute, the Future of Life thing. Bostrom's there. There's Max Tegmark, kind of all these different groups that are everywhere around all of this stuff. And what I'm interested in doing is kind of looking at the topology of it, or like the spectrum of it, or the constellation of, okay, who has what views and why. And then I have my own priors and kind of my own, biases and things that I'm interested in. And I think it's just kind of figuring out, well, what are the available options here? How are people thinking about this?
Right.
What are the reasons for their worries? What are the reasons for their non-worries? And then, trying to fit that into a framework about how we think about the future and what kind of values we want to design and plan for. It does really seem to me that where we are is it's I think a lot of this is just a design revolution.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that we don't talk about enough is, and it makes sense why, it's the kind of the fish joke from David Foster Wallace, the what in the hell is water? When you're using an interface, usually that interface becomes invisible, and you don't realize the extent to which the interface that mediates the relationship between you and the world, in many ways, it doesn't dictate it, but it plays a role in how things are configured. And the feed and the timeline and the incentives around that, I think, have fundamentally altered society over the past couple decades. And why maps are important for me, or why it's a interface kind of revolution, is what's the next interface as we move into kind of spatial computing future. And this is where, the Apple Vision Pro, it might not be like great because there's not a lot of content, but like the operating system and the interactions with the pinching and all that it's the amount of tech in the Apple Vision Pro is just absolutely bonkers. Like it's really insane. And then you think of the self-driving, again, that's a map. So what are the new types of interfaces that will kind of replace the feed and the timeline, and kind of the two-dimensional interface that creates this society, the spectacle? What happens to society and how we understand, again, ourselves and our identity, how we treat other people, how we relate to the world, and all the impact and influence that has on geopolitics and all of that? A slight interface change is massive. So for me, that's kind of the interesting thing. And so then, how I tie that back into thinking about like where I am on this radical accelerationist versus like maybe radical decelerationist, is I do think that there's a kind of caution that needs to be, we do need to be cautious, actually. Because it does, to Aschenbrenner's point and a lot of people's point, it's like, this is accelerating extremely quickly. And when we even look at just how society has evolved in the last 10 years or whatever, it's like things seem to be changing so quickly, and all these changes that happen, and then nobody's really privy that even something changed at all. And then all of a sudden you're kind of being demonized or canceled or whatever. And you're like, dude, I didn't even know that was I remember this happened to me once in LA where I rented a car on Turo. And I forgot what I said, but I said something. And the person said to me like, oh, we don't say that anymore. We say this. And I was like, okay, like what do you mean we don't? Like who's we? We don't say that. Who decided that we don't talk that way anymore.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not trying to be offensive, but now you're presupposing that like there is a right way to now speak.
Yeah.
And I'm not privy to it, and now I'm a douche because I don't know this.
Yeah.
And so that's a small example of just when things start moving so fast and so
Yeah.
quickly, and then there's no real discussion about any of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then even if there is a discussion, then everybody hates each other because you don't agree.
Yeah.
And it kind of seems like the dangers of AI do seem to be a lot of this of just fostering even further division, which I think obviously we're in a place as a culture where there's just insane division.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that the main interface through which we've learned to interact with the world is one that incentivizes exaggeration and kind of over the top stuff that is for views.
Yeah.
And so, like, of course, then that's just what we see now is like just over the top nonsense of, anything. And it's like not picking out, any particular candidates, but it's like you can just kind of say anything.
Yeah.
And there's a guy named Harry Frankfurt was a philosophy professor at Princeton. He has a great book called On Bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
And he's talking about the difference between being a liar and being a bullshitter, and that the liar is preferable to the bullshitter because at least the liar knows what's true and tries to mislead you into something false, whereas the person who's bullshitting has no regard or care about anything being true at all.
Yeah.
You're just saying stuff.
Yeah.
It's like a non-playable character you're just spewing stuff, and you have no care whatsoever about whether it's true.
Yeah.
And it kind of seems like that's where a lot of this has
incentivized.
evolved, which is how is that any different than like an LLM?
Yeah.
The LLM doesn't have a mod, doesn't care whether what it's saying is true or not. Sometimes you might prompt it and say like, hey, what you said here, is it really this book title? Like, I don't think it is. Like, I don't think what you just said is true. And then it'll be like, oh, I'm sorry, or whatever. But it doesn't actually care. It has no skin in the game. So it's kind of a bullshit machine in that sense.
Yeah.
And I do think that, I don't think it's the only cause, but it does seem like social media and the incentive structures that are built into it and what it incentivizes for has generated this kind of society where it does just seem like we live in the Roman Colosseum is the new society of the spectacle, and we're just kind of all watching reality happen.
Yeah.
And part of what I'm interested in is how do we become partners with in technology in a way that we're not watching reality, we're living it.
Right.
And to be on life, I think, is to be, how do we just we're thrown back into the world instead of, having this kind of ironic distance from it and rating it and living kind of the scored life of a kind of abstract, weird, sort of alienated relationship to the world.
Yeah. At JDS, we are super interested in health and wellness, and that can mean a lot of different things.
Yeah.
Whether it's CPG products or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Sauna House is an investment we just made. We think that's an awesome health and wellness play. So, like, we're seeing technology go forward at warp speed, and in some ways, that is leading to insane health benefits in what we eat, the medicine that we take, and we're talking about how AI can help determine breast cancer, do all these things that will make us live longer. At the same time, it seems like mental health is declining. Anxiety is on the rise. People are suffering and lonely in a lot of observations out there.
Yeah.
Can AI kind of curb that trend? So I guess taking away from like we're helping stop cancer and maybe focusing more on like building a map or an LLM, can that trend reverse? And I know you want it to reverse, and I know that you're building with that intention.
Yeah.
Like, what specific things can you as a builder be doing and thinking about? I'm just going to put one thing that I noticed out there in the air, and I think we've talked about this, is the subscription model versus advertising or data mining, whatever you want to call it. It was an interesting discussion. But things like that, like, how do you plan for trying to hit the reverse button and get people back on life rather than, at their dumb terminal?
Yeah. Well, I think I've thought about this quite a lot because, I mean, most of what I've said now about social media has been sort of demonizing it and pointing out, I think a lot of the unfortunate things and the disadvantages and the absurdities and the correlation between a lot of the decline in mental health, maybe even physical health, that seems to have happened once, 2010 kind of happened, where it was really kind of the explosion of moving from desktop to like mobile apps.
Yeah.
And that argument has been given by Jonathan Haidt in the Anxious Generation book, and then kind of all the research that he's done even before that, of like the pampering of the American mind, and then even some of his early research that he did about the different political positions, and kind of the psychology behind who adopts certain political positions and why. And then, so that whole thing, and then there was obviously a huge reaction to his argument because it seemed to be focusing on causation instead of the correlation that's happening, and that actually he looks at it too monocausally. That actually, if you read the book, it does kind of seem like, not that this isn't a bad thing, it is, but like really the argument seems to be that social media is horrible for a certain age and a certain gender. Like 8 to 12, or what is it, like 10 to 12-year-old for young girls is like the obvious psychological impact that social media seems to have. And then the correlated decline in quality of life. And then he kind of extrapolates from that, and then a lot of the challenges have just kind of been like all these different demographics, and how maybe what he's saying is not true. But he did an interesting interview with Tyler Cowen where they had some really, really good debate, and I think I agree with Haidt in just the sense that I think it might not be the cause of a lot of the stuff, but that it's an essential part of some of these, declining trends in a number of different areas. It seems to me like obvious.
Yeah.
At least seems like obviously true.
Yeah.
So, and I think, again, I think it has a ton to do with, again, interface and design decisions that have been made. And we all remember this documentary, The Social Dilemma, that came out in, when was that, 2018, 2019, something like that. I don't know. But it came out and we're all like, yeah, absolutely, I totally agree. That's right. We need to change it and blah, blah, blah. And then nobody did anything.
Yeah.
So it's almost like, well, maybe it was because we couldn't really imagine an alternative. It wasn't quite clear, well, yeah, what would the alternative be? And then there's a number of different moats that businesses have where it just becomes really hard to support and build an alternative because you're locked into an ecosystem.
Yep.
So I do think that right now where we are it's a cool opportunity space or an alternative space where we are, if you're an entrepreneur, somebody who's trying to innovate and do something, to help us flourish as a species and, grow society in a positive way, we're kind of at that moment of decision or a moment of design about, like, it's almost like a call to arms needs to be written.
Yeah.
Like a new Declaration of Independence of, spatial computing or something. Like right now we can decide where we would take this.
Yeah.
And to me, it's like I don't think I have all the answers, but it does seem to me that what maps create is this sense of being connected to a world around you.
Yeah.
And it's not this kind of like, again, this one-to-one sort of thing, where it's this two-dimensional kind of flat filter bubble. It is, I am in space. I'm in space and time. There's a world around me, and I'm trying to figure out how I can connect to that.
Yeah.
And I like to think of a musical reference of like tuning something. It's like how do you get in tune with the world and the rhythms of the world, finding your pace and how you best connect to the way in which you're living and moving in the world. How do you find that right tune? And in psychology, that's called flow. And we all kind of seek that flow, being in the zone, or whatever you want to call it.
Being on life.
Yeah. And for me, it's being on life. It's how do you find that balance, and how do you find that connection where we all have that feeling of just like, whether it's you say I'm crushing it, whether you say I'm killing it, whether you say I had a good day, whether you say I'm just like, I'm in a great mood. It's like, why do you have that feeling? And usually it's because you're in a rhythm. You feel like, it's not the illusion of like, I'm in control of everything. It's like, no, but I'm in sync with, I've got my rhythm down. And we all know that feeling of like a couple days off of the rhythm. Yeah. And it's hard to get back into that rhythm. It's hard to get back, just to choose to get back into the zone. Yeah. And this goes into like basic stuff in anthropology and sociology of like, rituals, cult. But I mean, the negative sense of like joining a cult, but like culture of just those types of rhythms. And so I do think that what I do think is that you can use maps as a new interface. You can use artificial intelligence, machine learning, neural networks, and all this as kind of an underlying brain to try to help us get into those rhythms. And I think that has personal benefits for mental health because we all want to have that feeling, even if it's something small. Like you see so many recommendations of this, like just get one thing done today. Well, how do you build a kind of Duolingo type approach to, okay, I want to be able to repeat that. Yeah. People share their streak all the time. Like my co-founder's son has a 342-day streak. He's like 9 years old. I think studying German or Norwegian or something. But he's got this streak that obviously there's a flex to that. He's sharing it. But imagine that you had a streak on Onlife of like 600-day streak of every day you won the day. Yeah.
I love that.
And now it's like, well, now because of Onlife, I am in a flow. Yeah. I feel like I'm constantly in a flow. And that's where I think those are the best kinds of products. I call it shit. Superheroes in training.
So let me ask you this. Did you start with shit or did you start with superheroes in training?
Well, I started with the idea of like just noticing that all my favorite companies are like, they're like functions. Yeah. It's like you put in an input and then somehow there's something going on in the black box. And then what pops out is a great designer. Like you have this nobody in somewhere in Eastern Europe and then nobody's heard of him. Nobody knows anything. And then all of a sudden he's got some tools. I also call this stink, which is like if your shit stank, like that's the key. Yeah. Because the shit is superheroes in training, and then stank is having the software, having the tools, having the economy, having a network, and having knowledge. And all the best companies make that accessible. You get access to Xcode. You get access to all these different libraries for iOS. You get access to those SDKs and those technologies, and you get access to an economy. Apple handles all the different currencies and all that kind of stuff for you. You get access to a network of like 1.3, 1.4, whatever it is, billion people using iOS devices all across the world, and you get access to knowledge. There's the Apple developer, $100 a year. Yeah. You get access to all that stuff, all this different knowledge of how to use these tools, and you can stink. And then what you do is you're building a product that when people go through, when Peter Parker, is bit by the spider and then becomes Spider-Man, or if Clark Kent goes into the phone booth, he pops out as Superman. It's like that's what great products do, is they know they're not the hero of the story. The person is the hero of the story, and really a great brand is in the transformation business. You're trying to, it's GPT, right? Transformer. You're in the transformer business of inputting something into your function, and then a transformation happens that then outputs something that was better when it went in. Yeah, I love that. So I think those are the best kinds of companies. And for Onlife, it's about, nobody thought learning a language was fun, but like suddenly, Duolingo, people just like for fun learning a language because Duolingo's managed to figure out they're in the transformation business. I don't know a language and I want to learn a language. Well, they've made it fun that when you go through that process, what is outputted is somebody that maybe isn't fluent in Norwegian, but they at least they're better than what they were. Yeah. Apple's the same. You might start somewhere, but like I'm more creative. I'm more knowledgeable, I'm more whatever because of this platform.
Yeah.
And those are the best companies. And hopefully what Onlife does with the Onlife app is try to help people build up these patterns, these rituals, these flows, these flow states that it's repeatable.
Yeah.
And that repetition is about being able to live your day, win your day, and have the day be something achievable and be able to connect to the world. And I don't want to get in the way and replace reality by you looking at Onlife. I want you to look and connect to the world. And again, it's just the vector or the function through which you're interacting. So I'm not saying that the future is that we all have no devices or something like that. I call this the K spectrum. On the one hand, you've got somebody like Ray Kurzweil, who thinks, we upload ourselves and, we fuse with technology. And then on the other side of the spectrum is maybe like a Kaczynski, that digital technology is the problem. We go live in the woods in Montana. And there's two kinds of spectrums: throw away all our devices, go back to nature, or fuse and become the device type of a thing.
Yeah.
For me, no, we're too far down it. It's not about shaming anyone who's on social media I love my phone.
Yeah.
But it's about how do we redesign the interface and the tool to throw us back into the world and not, it becomes the map is not the territory.
Yeah.
And so that kind of like blocker, I think, is what I want to overcome. And it seems like this is a very opportune time for innovators to do that.
Yeah.
And there's a new type of platform that's out there. And while it's not totally decentralized, I think what we have to figure out is how we can leverage these platforms to try to push things in a different direction that does go to work for us and hopefully unlocks growth in many different areas for people. And at the same time, maybe doesn't make us feel like crap about ourselves and treat people horribly and, push us to the brink of, annihilation.
I hope.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think I have anything else. I think we definitely broke the record here for inside moves length. All right, dude. Thank you so much. I know you're in New York all the way from Germany. Hope I didn't kill you with jet lag.
No, I'm good.
And
Appreciate
hope you,
the opportunity to come and talk about these things. They're difficult. A lot of these things are hard. Like I don't think there's any like just answers. Like you go in the store and take off an answer, which seems to be how we treat truth. That it just kind of shows up in your face. It's hard work. I've been thinking about these things for 20 years.
Yeah.
Very, very deeply in debates online, in person, all these different groups, reading groups, blah, blah, blah. It's like, I think there's definitely a move to, I think that's counterproductive, where we imagine all these different possible futures and then we immediately go to kind of all the negative consequences of them. And then we also look at the past and find everything that was wrong with the past. And then what we do is kind of have a perpetual present where we also don't seem to be too happy with the present.
Yeah.
So, but then we don't ever do anything, and it's like arrested development. And I think that now is just, as we said, is like a time to imagine some possible futures. And is it going to be perfect? No, because there aren't utopias.
Yeah.
But we have to try.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate the opportunity to come on, and here's my attempt. This is what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
That can we stop all bad actors? No. Is it going to be perfect and everybody's, a billionaire and happy and whatever? No. But you have to try to build an alternative to what we have now. It might not be a completely new thing, but it builds on it and it tries to imagine something better, and you try. And so, and part of that is sharing what that is. And so I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk for 2 hours.
Hell yeah, man.
About what I'm trying to do.
I really look forward to following. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Best of luck.
Thanks, man.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.